past comes alive.
Coming up, fearless women who fight to the death defending their way of life.
They are some of the most violent warriors to ever walk the earth, and they are women.
Amazons are really a universal male nightmare.
They are objects of fascination and fear.
To the Greeks, only the best and bravest among them could defeat an Amazon warrior.
Since the beginning of time, female warriors have been lionized and demonized for daring to step outside traditional roles. But did Amazons really exist? The truth lies in the gray area between fact and fiction, between the reality of women warriors and how men have perceived them. Join us for Amazon Women.
These are images that go against traditional female roles. These are images of what some call Amazon. The image of the Amazon creates controversy. The label, the word, conjures up many different emotions.
It's a strong word. It evokes emotion based upon the idea that women who are out there fighting and killing men, what could be worse in a society that's male-oriented?
The Amazons were a dream that men created, and that they were created not to glorify women, but to glorify men. The Amazon existed to be conquered.
In fiction, Amazons are portrayed as everything from bloodthirsty killers to sex-crazed nymphomaniacs. In fact, their reality is much simpler. Amazons are women who fight back against oppression by using violence.
I have my own definition of Amazons, which is a core of women soldiers led by women who live apart from men and whose basic aim in life is to make war.
But until recently, many scholars believed that Amazons were myths, stories created by the Greeks. Stories told by men as a way to frighten women. Challenge male dominance, they said, and you will become an Amazon.
Somewhere at the outer reaches of the known world was a culture where strong women had strong roles, action-oriented roles, were protectors as well as nurturers. It was a very threatening idea for them. The Amazons, as we've come to know them, really began as part of a coherent mythology devised specifically to keep strong women in their place.
Amazons seem to live only in people's imaginations, in stories from the Trojan War and in modern films and television shows. But in 1994, Amazons come to life. An archaeological team digging in Kazakhstan uncovered evidence confirming female warriors did in fact exist. Led by Janine Davis Kimball, the team works in oppressive heat, excavating an area filled with ancient burial mounds called kurgans. More than 2,000 years ago, nomads from the Russian steppes region traveled here to bury their dead. Kimball sifts through dozens of sites. She finds nothing unusual until she opens a burial mound located several yards away from the main group of graves.
And then suddenly we found this one burial with this young girl, and she had a dagger and a bunch of arrowheads in a quiver and amulets with arrowheads around her neck, all sorts of interesting things that indicated she was a warrior.
Over the next month, a dozen more graves of women warriors are uncovered. Weapons are pulled from the dirt: arrowheads, clubs, chunks of wood and iron, the trappings of a warrior's burial. With the opening of each new mound, evidence surfaces proving that one of the world's long-standing myths may be based on fact, not imagination.
I discovered that we have a significant percentage of women from that particular area only that were women warriors. And a few of them show evidence of being warrior priestesses, which, in my opinion, probably was even higher status for these women.
The location of the burial mounds is significant. It is only a few hundred miles from the northern border of what was once the Greek Empire. The Greeks were the first to write about Amazons in about 700 BC. Kimball's find in Kazakhstan is the first link between the stories of Greek mythology and real evidence of female warriors. Even the Greek word Amazon goes against the nature of a woman. It means with one breast. In ritualistic ceremonies, Amazons are said to remove their right breast with fire so they can aim and shoot a bow more easily. It's believed that Greek writers like Homer and Herodotus heard stories about the female warriors from Greeks who traveled through the region. The writers probably created their own version of the warriors to incorporate into their stories.
Without doubt, the evidence that Herodotus was hearing about warrior women coming from this region, as traders would go through, they would bring back these legends of women out there fighting, women who could do all sorts of brave and daring things. And obviously, this got mixed up into Greek mythology.
Most often they're depicted with predatory animals. Lions, sometimes tigers, a bear in the case of Artemis, the Greek goddess. This is the most common representation. In fact, that association of the ancient goddess with the predatory animal is so great that I think it's fair to say that these early goddesses were really anthropomorphized predator animals. We're not talking about the Virgin Mary here. They were frightening.
By mixing fact with fiction, the Greeks construct a picture of Amazon life.
They carried shields that were crescent-shaped, which evoked images of the moon, again another female symbol. They were not armed with spears, which is a good phallic male weapon. They were armed with the labrys, which was a double-headed axe.
The Greek Amazons are fearsome. They kill without mercy. Their only use for men is for mating. They slaughter any male baby born to them. They are seen as outcasts, strong women who are shunned by society. They become the perfect foil in a male world that fears women who may want equality.
To the Greeks, only the best and bravest among them could defeat an Amazon warrior. To defeat an Amazon was a test of manhood, not just for men in general, but for the best men, the greatest heroes. You had to be a Heracles or a Theseus or an Achilles to defeat one. It had been a very old technique in politics not only to demonize your opponent, but to raise them above what they really are, so that when you do finally beat them, you're just that much greater.
That's why Amazon becomes an emotional push-button word. It's irrational, it's emotional, it has no logic to it, it's not very good, and actually it's really fascinating. That's why we keep coming back to it.
But images of Amazon warriors would not be limited to the Greeks or bands of nomadic women roaming around the nether regions of Asia Minor. The spirit of Amazons would soon captivate another major empire. The year is 60 AD. Prasutagus, king of England's Iceni tribe, descendants of the Celts, dies a peaceful death. His wife, Queen Boadicea, reluctantly takes charge of the tribe and of the relations with the Romans who have occupied their land for 20 years. But the tenuous peace the king had forged in a treaty between his Iceni people and the Romans is about to be shattered. A Roman administrator named Catus decides to claim for Rome all the land and wealth intended for Boadicea. The move violates the treaty. Catus begins his assault by ordering Roman troops to publicly humiliate the queen.
The Romans stripped her, flogged her in a public square, even though she was royalty. She was the nominal queen of the Iceni. They also beat and raped her 2 daughters who were not yet of age, took what they wanted, and left.
The soldiers rampage through the Iceni countryside. The beleaguered tribe is powerless to stop them. Bloodied and beaten, Boadicea is no longer seen as a threat to the Romans. They move north to secure Britain's northern frontier, leaving the queen and her daughters to suffer alone.
Now we see Boadicea evolving into something other than a primordial Celtic war queen. She had been Prasutagus' wife and queen for a number of years. She had established that role. All of a sudden, she had been affronted both as a woman and as a leader in Celtic Britain. Her response was to make a tour of the other tribes in southern Britain, display her wounds, describe the outrages that had been performed on her daughter, and how the Romans had in fact reneged on their own treaty.
I always think of her as bodacious, as aggressive, as assertive, as hardy, as partaking of that European nomadic and warrior spirit.
Village by village, Boadicea rallies her people, especially women, to take up arms against Rome.
It's very easy to preach freedom, liberty. Very easy to preach it. It's much harder to practice it.
Here's where the story becomes quite interesting, because the selection of cities she chose to attack was very revealing of not only her mentality at the time, but the evolution of the woman warrior's mentality.
The first town she attacks is Colchester, filled with retired Roman soldiers and other Roman immigrants who had traveled from Italy to exploit Britain. The battle is swift and violent. The few Romans who survive report that the Iceni troops, especially the women, are bloodthirsty killers. The Roman general Paulinus, who is in Wales, sends a legion of soldiers to put down Boadicea's revolt.
Boadicea ambushed this legion in the field and destroyed it utterly. The first time any Celtic army had defeated a Roman army since the time of Julius Caesar, some 150 years before. And it raised Boadicea's status both as a warrior and a war leader enormously. Tribes flocked to join her because of this particular victory.
Within days, Boadicea's army has grown from a few thousand to nearly 100,000. Flushed from her victory and convinced strength in numbers can defeat the Romans, Boadicea sets her sights on London, the county seat. When Boadicea and her troops enter the city, they make sure the Romans know that the win at Colchester was not a fluke.
Not only did they kill the inhabitants and steal the treasure or reclaim the treasure for the British, but Boadicea went out of her way to torture the female inhabitants, the Roman female inhabitants of the town. Unspeakable atrocities were committed on the Roman women prisoners. It had changed from being a war of liberation for the Celts to a war of extermination against the Romans. This had now become a religious war of retribution.
With her London win, Boadicea moves on to St. Albans, a town just outside of London, occupied not just by Romans, but by Celts as well. Boadicea has a particular hatred for the Celts there because they adopted the Roman lifestyle and live easily under Roman rule. So when her troops arrive, they destroy everything and everyone, Celts as well as Romans.
By this time, Boadicea's war had become a war to recast the Celtic nation, to bring back Druidism, which the Romans had gone out of their way to suppress. So when St. Albans was attacked, it was basically a replay of London, but instead of brutalizing the Roman population, it was fellow Celts and Britons that were being slaughtered and sacrificed. So we can watch Boadicea's revolt come full circle, where she progresses from a traditional warrior queen to one which is more of the Amazon crusader, approaches the figure where she is now creating a new nation. In fact, British school kids today refer to Boadicea as the mother of Britain.
Realizing they have a crisis on their hands, Rome sends General Paulinus and 10,000 soldiers to quell the rebellion.
The butchery was quite horrific. Something like 80,000 Celts, all sources agree, were killed that day, and only 400 Roman casualties. So it was one of the most one-sided victories in history, and although it marked the defeat and the end of Boadicea as a Briton, as a British queen, it marked the beginning of her legend.
Defeated and devastated, Boadicea surveys the carnage wreaked on what was once her ragtag army. Unable to go on, she drinks poison, ending her own life on the battlefield. England's first great Amazon warrior is dead. In the summer of 1542, Spanish conquistadors in search of gold sail from Europe to the far-off lands of the New World. Long days at sea with little to do give the soldiers a chance to pursue one of their favorite pastimes, reading. One of the most popular books among Spanish men is a series of action-adventure stories titled Amadis de Gaul. Written by Garcia Ordóñez de Montalvo, the books chronicle the life of a chivalrous knight who constantly finds himself in the company of Amazons. As the Spanish reach the New World and set off into the jungle, they cross paths with groups of conquistadors who relate fantastic stories about native women they encountered inland. Much like the fabled Amazons of which they read in fiction, the Spanish believe that the land of the South American Amazons is, in fact, laden with gold. Some say they have seen well-organized bands of armed women patrolling the forest. Others talk of native men being used as slaves, and of male babies being killed or given away in disgust to neighboring tribes. Most distressing, some have seen the bodies of Indian men hanging from trees alongside rivers, an obvious warning for those who dare travel on Amazon lands. But these stories are dismissed as hearsay and rumors until a written account comes to light in 1542. From the diary of Gaspar Carvajal, a friar traveling with an expedition of men searching for the mystical city of El Dorado. As they travel in small boats along a vast, muddy river, they come upon villages under the control of women. Carvajal writes in his diary,
"We suddenly came upon the excellent land of the Amazons. These women are white and tall and have very long braided hair. They are very robust with their bows and arrows in their hands, doing as much fighting as Indian men."
When they saw these women standing along the riverbank, and they associated that with the Amazons, with fighting women, and that's how the Amazon River actually got its name.
Scholars debate whether the Spanish actually encounter Amazons in the jungle, or if the conquistadors' imaginations get the best of them.
The Spanish undoubtedly did encounter some Indian tribes in which the women fought alongside of the men. There's always the question, how much of it was real? We'll never know. After all, Indian men don't have hairy chests, and they do have long hair, So it's a question as to how many of these fighting warriors were actually female.
And much like the fruitless search by the Spanish to find the gold of El Dorado, the lure of discovering bands of Amazon women fueled the desires of explorers to fulfill their dreams.
Well, they always sent back stories that said, I captured an old Indian and he said that I'm only 2 days march from the real place that the Amazons are located in, and I know that if I can just go on for a few more days, I will find the wealth of the Amazon women. I have every reason to believe I'm getting closer and closer and closer.
One of the most bizarre stories involving South American Amazons comes in the late 1540s. Conquistadors send word back to Europe that they have found a band of Amazons claiming to be members of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The women supposedly say they hope the Spaniards will send bearded teachers so they can brush up on their Hebrew and refamiliarize themselves with their faith. A group of Dutch Jews in Holland raises money to send teachers to the newly discovered Amazon Israelites. But before the teachers travel to South America, the story is proved to be false.
And of course it was a hoax, and it never occurred and it never happened. But it's the amount of credulity was just enormous. I mean, people would believe anything.
16th century Amazon women not only had the Amazon River named after them, but also California. In 1542, a Spanish expedition led by Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sails north along the Mexican coast. On September 28, 1542, Cabrillo's ship sailed into what is today San Diego Bay. On shore, his men report seeing female warriors lurking in the shadows. The sightings remind Cabrillo of a story he read. Published in 1510, it depicts a mystical island civilization of Amazons headed by their queen, Califia.
He thought it was an island. The story is that there were women living on this island with golden helmets and golden shields, and they shot bow and arrows. They were really great warriors, and so he named California after the Queen Khalifa, that was the leader, the chieftain of this bunch of women warriors.
Some were merely legends, and some came from real-life struggles of violent band females fighting to preserve their way of life. In the spring of 1863, the British explorer Sir Richard Burton arrives in the West African coastal nation of Dahomey, present-day Benin.
Sir Richard Burton was a great Victorian traveler and explorer. He is said to have spoken 25 languages fluently and to know some 40 dialects. He was a prolific author. He wrote more than 40 books. He was also a diplomat.
Known for his extensive travels in Africa and the Middle East, Burton is on a mission for the British government, trying to make peace with the Dahomey people. 2 years earlier, in an effort to force the Dahomey people to stop slave trading, British warships had shelled coastal towns along what is known as Africa's Slave Coast. Dahomey, home to a violent, warring people, is an active participant in the slave trade, capturing and selling their tribal enemies. But it is the elite ranks of Dahomey warriors who amaze Burton. They are women.
Such was the size of the female skeleton and the muscular development of the frame that in many cases femininity could be detected only by the bosom. I have no doubt that this physical superiority of the working sex led the Dahomean race to the employment of women as fighters, They are the domestic servants, the ploughboys, the porters, and the field hands. Why should they not also be soldiers?
These were great soldiers. I have in my book a list of adjectives that were used to describe these women: brave, courageous, fearless, ferocious. The list goes on, but they also said they were cruel and pitiless and merciless. When they won, they were brutal. They were brutal. They were tough, tough cookies.
An estimated 5,000 female soldiers filled the king's elite ranks. They live in the nation's royal palaces in the capital of Abomey. Their training takes place inside the palace walls made of red clay.
There were sports. There was foot racing and wrestling, and they had target practice with muskets, their principal weapon being the musket. Maybe the principal physical training activity was dancing. The Amazons danced a lot, and usually their dances had a martial theme. They would have musket dances where they would toss their guns up in the air and twirl around and catch them when the guns came down. They had spear dances and sword dances, and some of these dances would involve actual battlefield behavior. They mimed behavior on the battlefield.
Amazons are trained to be mentally as well as physically tough. As they walk outside the palace through town, a slave girl ringing a bell precedes them. The sound warns every male to get out of the path and look away. Any man who touches a woman in an Amazon procession will be killed. The Amazons execute prisoners without mercy, mostly by beheading. One French delegation that visits Dahomey in the mid-1880s reports seeing an Amazon girl about 16 in training. She takes 3 swings with a machete before completely removing the head of a prisoner. She wipes the blood from her sword with her hand and then swallows it. Her fellow Amazons scream in frenzied approval. An Amazon chant confirms the pleasure derived from killing.
We are not women. We are man. Knife between our teeth, we scale the rocks. We'll drive those warthogs out of their hole. For our body is better armed than the porcupines. And if we no longer had an axe or arrow or dagger to defend us, don't we have our filed teeth ready to bite and tear, and our hard fingers stronger than iron claws?
How did Dahomey become home to such a violent race of women? European explorers learned that women began training for battle in the early 1800s.
The kings of Dahomey, in creating the Amazon Corps, they hoped to make up some of the disparity in manpower. It was the Yoruba threat to the east, and the Yoruba were not only prey for Dahomeyan slave raids, but they competed. The Yoruba were in the slaving business too. That disparity between the Yoruba and the Fon populations accounts for is the special circumstance that accounts for the formation of the Amazon Corps in Dahomey. It was a manpower shortage, basically.
An Amazon in Dahomey is a position of status, a rank high above non-Amazon women in the society. It is an honor the Amazons vow never to surrender. In 1872, the British entomologist J. Alfred Skirchley sees that dedication when he witnesses a battalion of Amazons defeat a rival army.
What spectacle is more calculated to inspire horror than a savage and brutal woman in a passion? And when we imagine such to be besprinkled with the blood of the slain, and perhaps carrying the gory head of some decapitated victim, one may cease to wonder at the dread with which these female warriors were, and still are, looked upon by the surrounding nations.
For nearly 100 years, the people of Dahomey, both men and women, wage war against the Mahi tribe to the north and the Oyo to the east. The fights are usually to avenge insults, capture slaves, or find victims for human sacrifices.
The Amazons of Dahomey were not exactly role models for feminists. For one thing, they engaged in the really sordid business of slave catching. They did not exalt womanhood. When they surpassed the men as warriors, they claimed that they had been transformed. They had become men.
It will take the French expansionism of the 1890s to put an end to Dahome's Amazons. On June 15, 1892, French ships begin a naval blockade of Dahomey to keep shipments of guns from reaching its shores. After 5 months of fighting, on November 4th, the Dahomey forces make their last stand at the city of Cana. The battle is one of the most murderous of the campaign.
They seemed to be immune to fear. They'd rush in, and if they were cut down by a bayonet thrust, even while mortally wounded, they'd fight back. There were some who would bite the throats of French soldiers. They really fought tooth and nail.
An Amazon knocks a French cavalry officer named Nulito off of his horse. He looks up to see an Amazon bearing down on him, a carbine in her hand and a machete between her teeth. Nulito later wrote that the woman roars like a wild beast, but he has time to fire and shatters her head with a revolver bullet.
Amazons took part in that last battle. The Dahomey gave up there. They sent a peace delegation to the French camp, and a French officer asked the head of that peace delegation how many Amazons had been fighting against the French and how many were still fighting. And the man said 1,200 at the beginning of the 7 weeks, and only 50 or 60 were left at the end.
Even after the French subdue the Amazons in Dahomey, the killing continues. Uniformed French soldiers who take Dahomey women to bed are often found dead in the morning, their throats ripped out.
Hey, hold on a second. I want to see something. I'm trying to bring up the chat panel to see if it'll... I don't know, I don't have dual screens hooked up right now. I was going to see if... It's 2013, by the way. Yeah. Let me see here. It just says connecting to YouTube live chat. Try commenting something, and I don't know if you're listening right now, but try commenting something in the chat window thing. There's should be next to the video, there should be a place for live chat. Unless it says it's disabled. It just keeps saying connected. Let me see here. Huh. I don't know. I'd need dual screens for that anyway. So yeah, I used to run a BBS, and chat rooms and forums, and censorship never does any good in my experience. They say you can tell who you're ruled by who you can't criticize. So, I wrote a post about the Jews, but actually, it wasn't. There was nothing. It was not hate speech, but it was somebody reported it and it got flagged as hate speech, even though there was nothing about hate in it at all. So what that does, though, is it doesn't help anything. By taking that down and banning me for 24 hours, it helps nothing. It accomplishes absolutely fucking nothing, because all that does is just makes people more conspiratorial. It makes them think, well, maybe, if I can't criticize the Jews, then maybe I really am controlled by the Jews. Like, serious, the amount of overreactiveness you get from any criticism of Jews or Israel or Zionism or anything like that. Like, the people they just jump down your throat, especially anything in any kind of establishment, business, or any, like Facebook and YouTube and all those people. Like, they're hyper sensitive about it. It's because you got these lobbies going all over the place scaring people. Now, there's a lot of reasons. Make coffee. I gotta work tonight. I was supposed to go to some art show, but I got ghosted. Whatever. Yeah. It's all a bag of shit. All of it, every bit of it. Jai Shri Ram. Ram, 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 Ram. Ram, Ram, Ram. I'm gonna turn the documentaries back on soon. Like, I don't want to participate in a forum where I don't have a voice. There's nowhere for me to say these copyright claims on my videos are fake. There's no option. There's nowhere for me to say that that wasn't hate speech and that they were wrong. There's no option to contest it. There's nothing. I have no voice. So why would I participate in a forum where I have no voice? So I'm done with Facebook. That's over. I wrote them about it and everything. The censorship is just too out of control. There's no free speech. It's a company. They can do what they want. It's not the government. They can have whatever rules they want. If they say you're only allowed to talk about candy, they can have that rule. They're allowed. They're a company. They're a corporation. They can. It's there. You just don't do business with them. So it's finally come to the point where I just can't do business with them anymore. And they make money off of you. So, I can't in good conscience continue to participate in a forum where I have no voice. I'm done with theater squares. That's over. You can build me a food market. And you need to bust down that jungle. Oh yeah, I have no respect for the environment in this game. I am min-maxing the hell out of this terrain. Clearing out all the jungle and the trees and the woods, yeah. I gotta get rid of this. Shit. I gotta get rid of that artifact so I can clear that jungle and put another farm there. Lord have mercy. Alright, documentary time. I'm gonna turn the mic off. For real, I'm gonna actually turn it off.
In French records, if really these things had taken place,
Channel. Frankenstein, one of the greatest horror stories ever. Where you see the passing of time.
The crowds in St. Peter's Square are praying like mad for the Pope's life.
Where moments refuse to die.
This is a momentous hour in world history. This is the invasion of Hitler's Europe.
And where victory lives on.
Plenty of girls are being kissed by plenty of boys they don't know, and they do not care.
You can love it, hate it, embrace it, or turn away.
Lennon was shot to death late last night outside his apartment building.
But it is a past we all share.
Come on out here and give me a salute. Big Navy salute.
This is where yesterday has a home, where we wonder what it was like back then.
Go forward, knights, in safety.
And not too long ago.
His spirit must live on.
It's where history has its place and where the past comes alive. The History Channel. Stories from the pages of time. Stories of triumph and tragedy, adventure and achievement, as we go in search of history. From its earliest moments on Earth, mankind has searched for a bond with forces larger than itself, and found that bond in special places where the physical world and the world of the spirit blend into one. Today, as in antiquity, there are those who believe that our planet is a living organism, and that certain places are charged with an energy that makes them sacred.
A sacred place is a lot like an acupuncture point on the body of the earth. It's a place where the spiritual realm is closer, more accessible, and powerful. It's a place that manifests extraordinary things. If you go there, you are more likely than not to have an extraordinary experience.
Tibet is such a place, the land of eternal snow, a country of uncompromising landscapes and a harsh, foreboding beauty. In 1933, author James Hilton wrote a novel, Lost Horizon, quickly made into a highly successful motion picture. It told the story of an Englishman who survives a plane crash in the icy mountains somewhere near China. He stumbles upon a valley oasis and a magnificent sacred city where no one ages, kindness prevails, and there is no suffering. Hilton called this fictional kingdom Shangri-La. Shangri-La was likely inspired by an ancient Tibetan belief that there is a place where heaven touches the earth. A physical, earthly paradise called Shambhala.
It comes as no surprise to me that James Hilton chose Tibet as the setting for Lost Horizons because of Tibet's mystery, its extraordinary beauty, its towering mountains, its desolate plateaus, its endless skies.
The 14th Dalai Lama, titular head and spiritual leader to more than 6 million Tibetan Buddhists, presides over a ceremony designed to show believers the way to Shambhala, the sacred kingdom.
My own feeling is the Shambhala should exist. Not mentally, but actually exist as a world or
geographical place,
world or something. So perhaps some just in somewhere in the space. In the Buddhist scripture, there are different kind of heaven. Some belongs with this world.
There are those who believe that an understanding of the meaning of this exquisite design could lead one to Shambhala. There are a number of Tibetan guidebooks or itineraries to Shambhala. None of them are precise enough for people to identify exactly where Shambhala is located. But the guidebooks do agree that it lies somewhere in the Tien Shan region west of the Gobi Desert. This is the isolated region of the Tien Shan near Duan Huang, the site of an extraordinary archaeological find. It is called the Cave of 1,000 Buddhas. Do these caves and grottos carved into the sandstone cliffs hold clues to the location of that mysterious land? The walls are covered with elaborate paintings and decorated with statues, some dating back more than 1,600 years. This very real place deepens the mystery surrounding the physical location of Shambhala, for the art here is said to depict scenes of that kind of paradise.
And given that it is in the heart of Asia, it is not surprising that people would imagine that in that area would be paradises, special magic lands, that wizards and angels would hide secrets and there for people fleeing the normal human problems.
These caves and the tales and fables of Shambhala fired the imaginations of many who longed to trek into the largely unexplored central region of Asia and the Himalayas. During the early part of this century, adventuresome Westerners organized several expeditions for the Tien Shan. Perhaps none was mounted more eagerly than that of Russian-born painter and archaeologist Nicholas Roerich. Between 1925 and 1928, he made several trips through that part of the world, enduring a litany of hardships. 5 in his party perished. Despite the difficulties, at the time of his travels, rumors abounded that Roerich actually attained his goal and found Shambhala, as depicted in these mystical paintings from the brush of the prolific painter.
It remains a mystery whether Roerich actually found Shambhala, the physical Shambhala. However, there are certain indications that he believed he did. There's one painting that Nicholas Roerich did called Burning of Darkness, and in it he depicts a group of men emerging from the mountains. The first is carrying a box from which emanates a blue flame, and this blue saturates the entire painting. It is believed that several of the men depicted in this painting were Mahatmas or masters or the residents of Shambhala.
In 1926, Roerich returned to his native land after an absence of almost 10 years. There he visited the commissars of Soviet Russia and brought with him a letter said to have been written by the Mahatmas, the wise men of Shambhala. Was it possible that this communique was genuine?
How he received this letter, who wrote it, how it came into his hands, was it given to him directly by people he felt were genuine Mahatmas? We do not know. It remains a mystery.
No one knows whether this letter has survived. Perhaps it lies forgotten somewhere in the vast Russian archives waiting to be rediscovered. But would it provide proof of the existence of Shambhala?
Could there be such a thing as Shangri-La? Just because we haven't seen it doesn't mean it does not exist.
There is no question that other sacred places do exist. Stonehenge rises from the pastoral farming plains of England, a Neolithic apparition still redolent with meaning in a cyberspace age. Might this ancient site's continuing lure be explained by very real geological forces?
Stonehenge is the sort of place where you should feel more energized just going there because it's relatively close to an earthquake fault line. And at an earthquake fault line, there is an upwelling naturally of electromagnetic energy from the earth.
For many of those who come here, the ancient landmark stirs a primitive response. The huge stones appear to connect the earth to the cosmos, and in doing so fill the visitor with a sense of being at one with the universe.
It is a place of pilgrimage today for many people, and in ancient times too. It's clear that Stonehenge was a meeting place for many people who came not just from all over Britain, but perhaps from all over Europe. I think of Stonehenge as a sacred site, one of the most important in the world.
It has long been a popular belief that the ancient Druids built Stonehenge, but today scholars offer other scenarios.
We know that Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old and possibly even older than that. Stonehenge may have been built by Egyptians or the ancient Celts. Some have even linked Stonehenge to lost civilizations such as Atlantis. It's been largely proven that Stonehenge is a huge astronomical computer. It was built to observe the stars, the sun, and the moon. It was built to observe eclipses, which occur on a 19-year cycle. No doubt, in ancient times, many important ceremonies and calculations were made at Stonehenge.
Men and women can affirm a place and enhance its sacredness through ceremony, ritual, through architecture and design. But I'd like to think that you can't make a place sacred. All you can do is affirm what's already there.
Could the same forces at work at Stonehenge have inspired people in other locations on the globe to a similar spiritual fervor? Across the world from England, there is an island where compasses are useless and legends tell of statues that walked. It appears on the navigation charts as a tiny speck in the middle of the South Pacific. We know it as Easter Island. Many centuries ago, the natives named it Te Pito Te Hernua, the navel of the earth.
There is a vortex at Easter Island, a magnetic vortex. In fact, if you get a good hiking map of the island, it will show you how at one of the volcanoes there is a strong magnetic anomaly. If you bring out your compass and you try and get just a normal compass bearing on Easter Island, you won't be able to do it.
Did this upwelling of the Earth's forces impel the natives to create the signature totems of this island? These are the Moai, the great stone heads of Easter Island. Some are so gigantic they stand almost 10 stories high. Commonly, they are dated to the 4th century AD, but many believe their true age is a mystery. There are literally thousands of these statues. What moves a people to carve so many sculptures out of volcanic stone?
I think that's one of the first things that's a subtle indication that whatever is here is inspiring people to create something very extraordinary. That's another sign of the sacred.
The statues were all quarried in one location and then moved into positions all around the island. Most were placed along the edge facing inward, not looking out to sea, even though the natives said the Moai were there to protect them. What did they need protection from? They were isolated. They lived more than 2,000 miles from the nearest earthly enemy. The oral histories tell us that the ancients who lived here believed that this island was once a part of a larger continent called Khiva.
They claim a cataclysm sank the rest of the continent except for that island. And then therefore the statues were there to have a power, a special power came out of their eyes. And this power was called mana, and this power kept the island from sinking under the ocean.
As with all sacred places, science and legend are at odds on Easter Island. Archaeologists believe that the Moai were moved to their locations on wooden rollers. The oral history, as passed from those who carved the Moai to their present-day descendants, relates a far different tale.
The Easter Islanders say that those statues walked. They claim that the statues themselves walked around the island in a clockwise way, and they had to walk around this one volcano with the very strong magnetic field.
Early European explorers dismissed these stories. In 1864, a missionary priest discovered 100 wooden tablets written in hieroglyphics that no one could decode. Today, only 21 are still in existence. Over the last 100 years, their translation has eluded some of the most brilliant cryptographers in the world. Do these mysterious tablets hold the true story of the Moai? Will they ever be deciphered? And there is another question we must ask. Is it always wise to unravel the secrets of the sacred places of the earth? The high desert of New Mexico, where secrets and mysteries are passed down from generation to generation, shared in this timeless way with a chosen few. Centuries ago, long before the coming of the white man, a tribe of Native Americans we call the Anasazi began this remarkable settlement. Chaco Canyon is a fold in the earth, a declivity just 200 yards wide and 15 miles long. What drew the Anasazi to this dry, inhospitable land? What occurred here that inspires a respect in other Native American groups that borders on fear?
The priests that pulled people together at Chaco Canyon had an enormous wisdom of the heavens as well as earth. And interestingly enough, the Navajos will not live there because they revere those ancestors of those priests so much that they would not want to offend them.
Chaco Canyon afforded the ancient ones peace and solitude. But more importantly, it was a spot where they could find communion with the deities they worshipped. For the Anasazi, the sun and the moon were both gods and family.
Call Earth Mother, Mother Earth, Father Sun, Father Moon. And they're like the parents of the people that occupy Chaco Canyon.
This landmark, called Fajada Butte, dominates the northern end of Chaco Canyon. It was here, high above the valley floor, that the people who inhabited Chaco affirmed their place in the universe. Each summer solstice, the sun would pass through these carefully arranged boulders, bisecting this spiral carved into the rock. The appearance of the sun dagger, as this shaft of sunlight was called, made Fajada the center point of an intense spirituality for those who lived here. What does this intricate stonework mean? Does stone on stone signify one prayer piled on another until the whole becomes a temple to a people's faith?
There was such a high level of spirituality in Chaco at the time. It's really not difficult for me to believe that a lot of that had to do with the preciseness of these structures and their concept of time frame. If it took a year to build a structure, then that's what it took.
What purpose did this remarkable architecture serve? Why did they build so many of these structures, known as kivas?
The kivas were underground ceremonial centers, circular in nature. Ceremonies took place in them, sacred ceremonies. One of the things they did that was quite interesting was they would use amber stones and rub them together to create electrical sparks and light. So, no doubt, magical ceremonies and dances took place in the kivas. Also, rituals having to do with coming of age and maturity.
Our nature is not to have an answer for everything. With mainstream society, they're curious to the point where they want to overturn every rock. They want to understand the mysteries. As Native Americans, we feel that there are certain things that should just be left alone, and we have no right to know what makes it function.
Today, Chaco Canyon is a national park, and archaeologists come here often to unearth ceremonial objects and exhume remains. Some fear that these excavations could disturb the spirits of Chaco Canyon.
As Pueblo people, we have gone after the fact, and we will go to those locations. We ask permission to be there on site. We ask for forgiveness of those people that have gone before us and have excavated the sites and have developed the sites. Then we ask the spirits to not be offended and to continue to be the givers of good and to be the givers of life.
Many believe that those who treat this sacred site with respect will be rewarded with a mystical experience.
Maybe the person feels that they're lost in this world. If they go to Chaco with the understanding and the hopes that they can find their identity or find their direction. And I think if one is really focused, and one is focused from the heart, from the mind, and from the body, and from the spirit, then one can make that connection of being given proper guidance.
The year is 1532. The invading Spanish conquistadors under the command of Francisco Pizarro land on the shores of Peru to begin their bloody march across South America. They are searching for El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. Despite the swath they cut through the continent, they never find El Dorado. Nor do they find the true treasure of the Andes, the great peak of Machu Picchu. Located high in the mountains, nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, Machu Picchu is a city of faith and contradictions.
Machu Picchu remains to us a beautiful and mysterious place. There's a lot of things we don't know about Machu Picchu. We don't really know what the city was built for, or even who built it exactly. Even though it's ascribed to the Incas, it's quite possible the Incas only inhabited this city as they inhabited other cities.
The Incas lived and worshipped on this magnificent mountain for scarcely more than 50 years. It was deserted well before it could be discovered by Spanish soldiers. Even in ruin, the city is as stunning as any great cathedral. Each altar of worship has been carefully framed by the builders. What first drew the builders of Machu Picchu, whoever they may have been, to this remote and difficult location?
Machu Picchu, of course, is probably a very special place. Most likely it was a religious place. The Incas did worship mountains, and mountains were very important in their cosmology. Maybe that's one of the reasons that the place was chosen. And I don't know of any other place in the world where the man-made and the natural come together with a beauty that is really astounding.
How much a part does physical majesty play in making Machu Picchu a sacred site?
According to the shamans there, they say that while Machu Picchu itself is a masculine place, it is the old man of the mountain. That this stone that sits on top of an altar that looks kind of pointed, this is actually a stone that pays homage to a female mountain, Huayna Picchu, which is right nearby. And the harmony between Huayna Picchu, which is the home of Pachamama, the earth goddess, to create the stone in the same image as the mountain brings that energy right there to that stone.
For the Incas, who deified the elements of the natural world, including the mountains and the sun, Machu Picchu was a place of magic and mystery. Imagine how the uninitiated felt when, on a winter solstice morning, they would make their way up the steep trail to the mountaintop. They would stand here in the pre-dawn chill near El Torreon, the tower which protected this sacred rock. Then, in the gathering light, just as the priests had predicted, the stone would come alive as the rays of the rising sun flowed through the groove carved by the holy man. The Spanish missionaries who witnessed Inca rituals at other sites marveled at the awe with which the Incas greeted the rising sun.
As soon as the sunrise began, they started to chant in splendid harmony and unison. They all stayed there chanting from the time the sun rose until the time it set. And as the sun was sinking completely and disappearing from sight, they made a great act of reverence, raising their hands and worshiping it in deepest humility. Father Cristobal de Molina, 1536.
Precisely as the sun was setting, legends say the priests would capture it by tying it with a golden rope to Intihuatana. The capture ensured that life would go on till another solstice. To this day, some refer to the stone as the hitching post of the sun. With the Spanish conquest, the Inca Empire fell to ruin. But Machu Picchu remained unspoiled and intact. The Spanish never found it. For the next 300 years, Machu Picchu slumbered undisturbed in the arms of the jungle, a city remembered only in legend. Then, at the beginning of this century, an American history professor named Hiram Bingham, using ancient texts as his guide, climbed to the very top of the Great Peak. Bingham and his workers removed layer upon layer of vegetation. and the ancient city once again beckoned to those souls searching for renewal. The hills of Jerusalem have attracted worshippers since time beyond memory. Before the Bible, before Abraham and David, Jerusalem was a PowerPoint on the body of the earth. In that dim past, the god Shealem was worshipped by the Canaanites, who built a temple here in his honor. Today, Jerusalem is a maelstrom of religious convictions. No other city on earth draws the faithful or moves them to fervor as does Jerusalem. 3 of the great religions of the world lay claim to the city set on the Judean hills. According to the Hebrew Bible, when God commanded that Abraham offer in sacrifice, Abraham prepared to do so on this mountain. It was in the sleepy village of Jerusalem that King David united the 12 tribes of Israel, and in doing so, changed its history for all time. It was here, the Bible tells us, that a beaten and bloodied Jesus struggled through the streets, dragging his cross on his way to his crucifixion on Golgotha, the place of the skulls. It was here, according to believers, that he rose from the dead, altering forever the concept of the divine. Muslims believe that Muhammad stepped from Jerusalem into the 7th heaven, the abode of God, where he received the 5 prayers of the Quran. One of the most sacred icons in the Muslim faith, Muhammad's footprint, is said to be embedded in this rock. The relic is protected and venerated today, as it has been for almost 13 centuries, inside the mosque called the Dome of the Rock. As ancient as it is, this shrine is a recent one in the spiritual history of Jerusalem.
One of the most remarkable things about Jerusalem is how civilization after civilization is found built one on top of the other in the same city. And the great mystery is, why that city? Why does each civilization build there and then whisper its heritage to the one that follows?
This is the Western Wall, the last vestige of Solomon's temple. It was built in the 7th century on the ruins of at least 2 temples, one dating to the century before Christ was born, and the other constructed by King Solomon 1,000 years before that. Behind this wall, there once existed a windowless room known as the Holy of Holies, which housed the most sacred icon of a chosen people, the Ark of the Covenant. Inside the Ark were stored the 10 Commandments, which the Bible says were written by the finger of God on stone. Today, this wall is known as the Wailing Wall. Jews come here to mourn the loss of the Ark, long since plundered. They wail to express the pain of their many exiles from their beloved Jerusalem. They slip prayers into the crevices between these hallowed stones, and in touching them, hope to connect to the ages. Behind this wall in Jesus' day, the money changers sat defiling the house of God. By driving them out and proclaiming himself the Christ, Jesus may have signed his own death warrant. Christians come to Jerusalem to relive the climactic moments of his life at the stations of the cross. The city of Jerusalem continues to be an earthly connection to the spiritual. Its streets are constantly filled with pilgrims, Jews, Christians, Muslims, each visiting their holy sites.
It shows what a tremendous place this small, obscure, out-of-the-way city began to play in the hearts and minds of human beings, because this was the place that God had chosen. And if God chooses a city, it makes it immediately and forever the center of the world.
It is a tragic irony that this chosen place has, through the centuries, been the object of more strife than perhaps any other on the face of the planet. It has suffered successively at the hands of the Assyrians, Babylonians, Jews, Romans, Muslims, and Christian crusaders. Even today, the streets run with blood spilled in the name of Yahweh, or Jesus, or Allah. Is Jerusalem under attack precisely because each of us holds something different as sacred? Why are we so protective of that which we call holy?
People have made these sacred places important in their lives because we need sacred places. We need places where we can act different than we might normally in our house or on the street. We need them to survive. We focus our ideas, our aspirations, our imagination, our hearts on these places.
What if the true sacred places cannot be reached by horseback or helicopter? Who then will show us the way to our own Shangri-La? Now, as in antiquity, there are those in whose presence we feel the spirit of the divine. For millions, the Dalai Lama, who may hold the key to the sacred place he calls Shambhala, is such a holy man.
To me, Shambhala is really mysterious land. If we accept part of this world, then we have to find through map. You can't find. So it is quite clear Shambhala not exist on this planet as a country.
The mystic places of the earth whisper their secrets across the ages, reminding us of a time when the earth was a place of miracles and mankind was filled with wonder. It's a spirit which still lives for those who journey in search of history. Explore the first metropolis of the New World, a home of monumental buildings and ritual sacrifice. Discover an ancient people who built an earthly paradise on a foundation of death. "30 miles northeast of Mexico City, an aura of silence and secrecy blankets what remains of an ancient metropolis. It has been an enigma so long that it mystified even the Aztec Indians, who were fascinated by its ruins 700 years ago. While Imperial Rome thrived a world away, this place was the dominant civilization of the Americas. But today, the city's true name is unknown. The people of Mexico call it simply Las Piramides, the pyramids. Scholars call it by the name ascribed to it by the Aztecs, Teotihuacan, the abode of the gods. Thousands flock here every year to celebrate the summer and winter solstice. Those who walk these ancient streets sense that something spectacular, perhaps even magical, occurred here 2 millennia ago. But the precise nature of those events has remained eternally elusive.
The Teotihuacanos were really the mystery people of ancient Mexico, because although they built the largest single city and one of the largest civilizations of ancient America, we don't know who they were. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know which ethnic group they were.
Not a lot is known about the Teotihuacanos themselves. Some have suggested that their city was once a magnificent utopia. But it was also a place where hundreds of skeletons of sacrificial victims were found buried in a mass grave. Scores of archaeologists now share a passion for probing the ruins of this ancient city. They are seeking answers to questions that have intrigued scholars since excavation first began here 75 years ago. Although Teotihuacan remains one of history's most baffling enigmas, experts have begun to unravel its secrets. One of the most intriguing revelations is that it was laid out according to a set of alignments that linked it to the movements of the stars relative to the surrounding mountains.
Clearly, some genius came up with a concept to design this city. And once the plan was formed, for the next hundreds of years, it was simply elaborated and grew like a crystal out from the center.
Although Teotihuacan sprawls magnificently over 8 square miles, the most fascinating structures lie at its heart. The main thoroughfare of the city is what the Aztecs came to call the Avenue of the Dead. They named it that because they believed the ruins of ancient temples alongside it held the tombs of the city's rulers. 2,000 years ago, magnificent processions probably paraded along the avenue. Looming majestically over Teotihuacan is the city's mesmerizing focal point, the Pyramid of the Sun. 20 stories tall, measuring more than 700 feet to a side at its base, it rivals the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. But unlike that structure, its principal function was not as a tomb for a king. Instead, the Pyramid of the Sun may have been a monument marking Teotihuacan's most sacred spot. Hidden directly beneath it lies a mysterious cave. It extends 330 feet from its mouth near the base of the pyramid to a point beneath the pyramid's center. Scholars think this cavernous expanse may have been where Teotihuacanos believed the world was created.
We know for later mythologies of central Mexico and even the American Southwest that caves are often considered to be the place of origin, that humans were born out of a cave. Basically, the earth is a great womb. The cave under the Pyramid of the Sun may have been the cave.
As the people of Teotihuacan ascended the Avenue of the Dead, they were lured onward by another monumental structure, the Pyramid of the Moon. It is carefully framed against the rugged backdrop of a nearby mountain. The pyramid and the mountain were inextricably linked because the Teotihuacanos revered the mountain as the home of their storm god. 2,000 years ago, the Pyramid of the Moon was erected in his honor. From its several levels, under the star-speckled canopy of night, the priests of the city oceans of the heavens. From here, Teotihuacanos looked to the stars to understand their future.
They viewed the stars and the planets in the night sky as entities, as beings that went through complex journeys that they would rise out of the underworld in the east, through interact with each other, and then enter into a deadly journey in the underworld, only to rise again the next day.
At the opposite terminal of the Avenue of the Dead is a colossal sunken plaza, the Citadel, or La Ciudadela. The Citadel was a vast civic and religious complex, the spiritual and physical heart of the city. With its almost 40 acres, 100,000 people could congregate. Teotihuacan rapidly grew into a vibrant metropolis, which 250,000 Mesoamericans called home. But in the 8th century, its people suddenly and mysteriously deserted it. Centuries later, after the Aztecs rose to prominence in ancient Mexico, Teotihuacan was already in ruins. To the Aztecs, it became a hypnotic source of fascination and wonder.
The Aztec obsession with Teotihuacan is certainly understandable. They were incredibly awed by the ruin. They imagined that Teotihuacan was so incredible that it could not possibly have been built by human hands, that it has to have been built by the gods.
The Aztecs who arrived here in the early 14th century were but the first to be mystified by Teotihuacan. Who were the people who once lived here? And how did they fashion their advanced civilization? Today, Teotihuacan broods silently. Its majestic pyramids are but a shadowy reflection of their former grandeur. But they endure as a monument to a noble idea that took root here 2,000 years ago. Some scholars believe the city's builders made a conscious effort to create a glittering utopia, a bold social experiment that is without precedent in the entire history of Mesoamerica. What drove the Teotihuacanos to embark on their daunting mission? The answer, perhaps, lies in another prominent city 35 miles away, Cuicuilco. 3.5 centuries before Teotihuacan's rise, Cuicuilco dominated Mexico's central plateau as an important religious center. But around 50 BC, its glory was erased by catastrophe. A volcanic eruption engulfed the city, destroying the monumental temple that was the symbol of their beliefs. The terrified inhabitants fled to safer regions and eventually founded Teotihuacan. But they would forever be haunted by the trauma of this great natural disaster.
The volcanic eruption had a psychological impact. It isn't just a practical matter of moving away from the volcano. It's not that often that you have a volcano literally covering the major temple of a city. And it must have made people reevaluate their contract with the gods and perhaps see this as the anger of the gods. I think that there was a promise that if they came to Teotihuacan, they could build an earthly paradise, a harmonious new world, a new contract with the gods that would make sure that this kind of disaster never happened again.
Some scholars believe the Teotihuacanos were driven to create a utopia in order to find favor with their gods. But the ingredients of this perfect society and their methods of achieving it remain unclear. Their strategy may have been based on the idea that the needs of the many must, in all cases, outweigh the needs of the individual. Scholars point to the Teotihuacanos' art as evidence of this belief.
They seem to be really emphasizing the importance of the group over the individual, the importance of balance, the importance of community. And I think that's one of the major strengths of this site, was they had sort of a cult of the warrior, a cult of the soldier, that you would die for the common benefit of the group.
A universal, selfless devotion to the community, what many cultures consider a noble yet unattainable ideal. Yet the Teotihuacanos seem to have transformed it into an everyday reality. What was their secret? Once again, their art may provide a vital clue. It contains startling evidence that they broke a centuries-old tradition by refusing to honor individuals as rulers.
Instead of rulers, we have representations of identical profile figures looking very much like a committee. So we have a representation at Teotihuacan of a rulership that kept a very low profile and that made very sure that not a single individual was elevated above the rest. In a way, a parallel to this might be the United States. We are a society that does not glorify our rulers, that is to say our presidents. Similarly, Teotihuacan may very well have had important rulers, but there was not a cult devised around them.
The lack of worshipful devotion to rulers may be the key to one of Teotihuacan's most intriguing puzzles. Almost inconceivably, this highly advanced culture left behind no evidence of a written language. Could it be that the Teotihuacanos deliberately refused to devise one? In other ancient cultures, the literary record often revolved around the exploits of its ruler. With no kings or queens to glorify, the Teotihuacanos may not have been as driven to formulate a formal written dialect. Even so, this has puzzled scholars, especially when they consider that a written language would have been imperative for Teotihuacan's role as a center of Mesoamerican commerce.
The Teotihuacanos were trading with the Maya, so they knew about this writing system, yet they must have actively rejected its use. Can you imagine this? Think of how useful a writing system would be if basically even all you want to do is keep track of trade.
Some scholars suggest the Teotihuacanos rejected a written language because they wanted to distinguish themselves from their neighbors, who chronicled the lives of their leaders in writing.
It's this huge center in direct contact with major centers all over Mesoamerica, but still so distant and so aloof. And I think that's the great statement, is they're trying to show themselves as different and aloof, that they are separate and special.
The extraordinary people of Teotihuacan, unconcerned with exalting their rulers, were able to effectively rechannel their energies. They had a loftier goal: to improve the quality of life of the common people. Proof of this can be found in the city's enormous network of apartment compounds. Within these multi-family dwellings, 200,000 Teotihuacanos lived, worked, loved, and died.
There is no other Mesoamerican culture that spends so much time and energy and labor in building homes for the ordinary people. And they indicate a real attempt at organizing the population on some both political and cosmic level. No other city in Mesoamerica ever went to so much trouble with its population.
For 700 years, those who called these rooms home were united in a common purpose: to make their utopian dream a reality. In that effort, they were bonded by their religious beliefs.
Religion has to have been the cement that kept Teotihuacan together. And we know this not only from the enormous size of the major temples, but also from the fact that religious activity was associated with everybody at every level.
The Teotihuacanos erected their earthly paradise to ward off the wrath of their gods. But to remain in their favor, they had to provide still more, even offering themselves as food for the gods. 1,500 years ago, the utopian metropolis of Teotihuacan basked in its glory. The people who walked these streets embraced a life in which the common good was paramount. Harmony and tranquility reigned. But Teotihuacan also had a dark and sinister dimension. In 1983, archaeologists made a chilling discovery in a majestic structure known as the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. What they found would redefine our perception of this ancient society. Carefully arranged in a mass grave were the crumbling remains of more than 200 men and women, victims of an orchestrated ritual of human sacrifice.
The reason we know they're sacrificial burials is because there are so many of them all at once, because nearly all of them had their hands tied behind their backs like this. And if you take a close look, you realize their ankles are also suspiciously close together. So it's pretty clear that they were bound hand and foot and didn't necessarily go willingly to their deaths.
This disturbing discovery challenged the very notion that Teotihuacan was a benevolent society, and that its people were devoted solely to peaceful pursuits. It appears as if human sacrifice was an everyday part of the city's lifestyle. But why? The answer to this intriguing riddle may be found in the powerful religious beliefs of the people of ancient Mesoamerica. Their attitude toward death becomes clearer when we understand how they perceived the nature of life. Unlike other religions in which life is looked upon as a gift from a supreme being, they believed that life was theirs simply because they forcefully took it from the gods.
They lived literally on stolen time. They believed that our bones were stolen from the gods of the underworld, and they were stolen. And basically, we tricked the gods of death. That's why we're still around. But we're going back. There's no doubt about it. And the trick is to keep life as long as possible. And the gods here are not necessarily on our side. To survive here, we have to find ways to have them respond favorably to us.
For the Teotihuacanos, the most effective method of appeasing their may have been to return to them a measure of the human life that was originally taken from them. So the death of a few select humans may have ensured life for the rest of the people. This grisly destiny might have been the accepted price for living in an otherwise benevolent society. But did those who were sacrificed willingly surrender their lives? Some scholars believe the leaders of Teotihuacan did not exact this ultimate price from its own citizens, but from outsiders. In religious crusades, Teotihuacano warriors would venture out in search of sacrificial victims in neighboring populations. Seeking divine guidance, they would look to the heavens and regulate their crusades according to the movements of the stars.
We believe that there was a practice of sacred warfare and ritual sacrifice based on the motions of the planet Venus. We jokingly call this Star Wars. And we can imagine that their astronomer priests waited watching the dawn sky to see if the planet would appear that day. We think that perhaps if they saw it, that they announced that it was time to conduct a certain type of battle or raid, the purpose of which was to obtain captives for later sacrifice.
The Teotihuacanos recorded ritual slayings in colorful murals, but the scenes never depict the actual sacrifice, only its aftermath. The possible reason for the omission is surprising.
Instead of seeing people having their hearts removed or scenes of conquest, we simply see people holding up curved blades of obsidian with hearts on the end of it. For a while, people thought that this meant they were simply harvesting nopal cactus fruits, but instead it's suggesting that they would dispatch the victims as easily as dispatching or harvesting a fruit. They don't really care about your background, they don't care about your personality, they don't care if you're having a bad hair day. Basically, when you're captured by them, you're food for the gods.
It is also possible that the sacrificial victims in the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent may not have been outsiders, but loyal citizens of Teotihuacan itself. Scholars acknowledge another theory. The deaths may have been part of an early ritual, dedicating the pyramid to the gods following its construction.
The fascinating thing is, they're not dressed as foreigners. These don't seem to be captives from another area, but they're dressed as Teotihuacanos. In other words, we're looking at almost a self-sacrifice at the site, sacrificing their own warriors in this great dedication event.
No matter who these sacrificial victims were, what happened here some 1,800 years ago may have had profound consequences all across Mesoamerica for centuries to come. 1,000 years later, perhaps it became the inspiration for the sacred myth of creation among the Aztecs.
What they say about this site is this is where the gods killed themselves to make the sun come up. They were reborn as the sun and the moon. And following this, all the other gods killed themselves. So what the Aztecs are describing is a mass sacrifice at Teotihuacan. And you almost wonder whether these are reverberations created by the first initial event here at Teotihuacan. That even later peoples remembered this great mass sacrifice, and it became a part of their ideology as well.
Fact over the centuries may very well have become folklore. This one dramatic instance of mass human sacrifice may therefore be at the core of the enduring mystique of the Teotihuacan. Yet violence and death would come in many forms here. Today, Teotihuacan exudes a mesmerizing sense of drama, just as it did 500 years ago. When the mighty Aztecs discovered this ruined city, they immediately fell under its spell. Among all the Aztecs, none was more spellbound by it than their supreme emperor, Moctezuma. In the end, his obsessive desire to unlock the secret of Teotihuacan would lead him to commit one of history's most tragic mistakes. According to legend, every 20 days, Moctezuma would trek 30 arduous miles from his imperial capital to Teotihuacan. Like all Aztecs, he revered the ruin as the home of the gods. In supplication to them, he would perform the ritual of human sacrifice. What drove Moctezuma to make this pilgrimage? Part of the lure must have been the riddle of the city's unknown history. The gods alone could answer the questions which tormented him. One god in particular would grip him in an almost hypnotic trance. His name was Quetzalcoatl. According to legend, Quetzalcoatl had long ago descended to earth in human form. A god of culture and learning, he had taught the people crafts and skills to better their lives. But after 20 years, he had been betrayed by his brother gods and to leave Mexico in disgrace. But as he sailed off to the east, Quetzalcoatl had promised he would return one day to reign his kingdom. Aztec priests had calculated he would reappear in 1519, and in that very year, an imposing figure indeed sailed in from the western horizon. In one of history's most bizarre coincidences, the Spanish adventurer Hernán Cortés arrived in the New World at the precise time foretold for Quetzalcoatl's homecoming.
Cortés and his men come sailing out of the east, fulfilling this prophecy. Very interesting, and this was one of the reasons that the Emperor Montezuma was so ambivalent and indecisive when he met Cortés. Indecisive, not knowing whether or not he had come to meet a god.
When Moctezuma first lays eyes on Cortés, he is amazed. Cortés matches Quetzalcoatl's description in every way. White skin, a dark beard, elegantly dressed. For the awestruck Moctezuma, the ancient prophecy of Quetzalcoatl is at last revealing itself in the form of its most legendary deity. In turn, Cortés regards Moctezuma as holding the key to another quest, one that consumes his imagination. Cortés has ventured to the New World only to search for the fabled El Dorado, a legendary city made entirely of gold. It is an obsession he cannot conceal from the Aztec emperor.
The emperor said to Cortés, "You're always asking about gold. Why are you so interested in gold?" And Cortés is said to have replied, "We Spaniards have a disease that only gold can cure."
Cortés's fixation on gold is the first clue which makes Moctezuma suddenly realize he is not in the presence of Quetzalcoatl. In the days that follow, his impassioned awe of Cortés rapidly gives way to mistrust. Unknowingly, the Aztecs and Spaniards have embarked on a disastrous collision course.
When the Spaniards and the Aztecs met, it set off what really was, as close as this planet will ever come, to a war of the worlds. Here were two complete cultures of equal sophistication who had no idea that the other existed.
In a brazen act which enrages the 250,000 Aztecs in their capital city, Cortés and his men suddenly take Moctezuma as hostage. To placate the enraged people, Cortés allows the emperor to address his subjects. What happens next remains debated to this day, but scholars agree that Moctezuma becomes the first casualty of a tragic conflict.
The Spaniard side of the story is that they asked him to go out on one of these flat roofs and speak to the populace, and they were so outraged that the emperor would allow himself to be taken prisoner, that stones were thrown, and he was killed.
Some historians believe it is not the Aztecs, but Cortez himself who is responsible for Montezuma's death.
Another side of the story is that perhaps the Spaniards garroted him, they choked him, but there is no proof of that. So it remains a controversy.
The circumstances of Montezuma's death are still an historical puzzle. Today, we know only that his death would trigger a night of chaos and carnage. During the turmoil, Cortez and half his men managed to escape the Aztec capital. But still to come would be another battle, which would turn the tide of the war. Fate decrees that it take place in the shadow of the Pyramid of the Sun. There, Cortez and his men are horrified to learn they have marched into an ambush.
There were the amassed warriors of Tenochtitlan and a neighboring city, Texcoco, waiting for them. And this was practically in the shadow of Teotihuacan. And it was probably the most important battle of Hernan Cortez's career.
Hopelessly outnumbered, Cortez scans the battlefield and identifies the Aztec commander by the imposing feather and silver crest strapped to his back. In an act of desperation, he and his men charge and tear the symbolic emblem from him.
Once that device changed hands from the Aztec leader to the Spaniards, it was as though the gods had spoken, because the Aztecs were a very fatalistic people. And according to the accounts, the whole mood of the battle changed.
Surviving to fight another day, Cortez eventually rallies support among tribes unfriendly to the Aztecs and destroys their civilization. A mighty ruler, a sacred prophecy, and the fall of an empire. The mesmerizing lure of Teotihuacan had altered the course of history. Many who visit here today are spellbound by the same aura that once captivated Montezuma. Though few believe, as he did, that this was a city of gods, they sense that something incredible once took place here. But in the 8th century, this utopian paradise mysteriously crumbled. Why? What destroyed it? For 7 centuries, Teotihuacan reigned as the most dominant power of the Western Hemisphere. But around the year 750, its inhabitants suddenly and unaccountably abandoned the utopian city they loved. The reasons for this remain unclear. Many scholars believe that somehow their great urban experiment went terribly wrong. The people possessed a profound respect for nature and tried to exist harmoniously with it. Yet scholars theorize they may have violated one of their fundamental beliefs.
In Mesoamerica, and presumably at the city of Teotihuacan, people did not consider themselves as being in the center of the world. The world was not made for us to use and abuse, but we have a rule and a duty to fit into this world and to maintain balance.
In direct opposition to the Teotihuacanos' obligation to the environment was the challenge of building their mammoth metropolis. They were confronted with a crucial decision. To continue their noble experiment in living, they would have to violate one of their most sacred principles: to plunder the landscape of its natural resources. Apparently, a fateful choice was made. Nature would be sacrificed so their great city could live.
Teotihuacan, just to be built, is causing an incredible environmental desecration up in central Mexico. One of the things you need in order to make all those fabulous paintings and to make those huge buildings is a lot of mortar. And the way you get mortar is that you burn limestone. And the way you burn limestone is you cut down whole forests.
Perhaps by the year 750, the plundered landscape could no longer sustain the enormous city. When the people of Teotihuacan ritually sacrificed their fellow citizens, they believed they appeased their gods. But in sacrificing nature, they trespassed where no gods could save them. Some scholars believe that the desecration of the environment might have enraged not only the gods, but the city's inhabitants, spurring rebellion. Perhaps the society that once demanded selfless devotion could no longer deliver its promise of harmony. Evidence indicates that the people may have taken their vengeance, focusing their fury on the city itself.
It seems to have been at one moment almost that a great many buildings were systematically burned and destroyed. Not just burned, but broken apart and thrown down, as if there's a lot of vested hate and anger going into this.
A gleaming utopia born 2,000 years ago passed into legend. Today, scholars are eager to remind us that its catastrophic failure should not overshadow the centuries of success it enjoyed.
I think I'd like to put it in context by saying that actually Teotihuacan lasted for about 600 or 700 years. And so far the United States has lasted for a little bit more than 200 years. And let's see how we're doing in the year 2500. And maybe we should put the question the other way around and say, why did Teotihuacan last as long as it did?
A millennium after the fall of Teotihuacan, these pyramids exude a mystique which still beckons. "2,000 years ago, a burst of greatness exploded here in the Valley of Mexico. Greatness linked to the shedding of human blood and appeasement of demanding gods. And yet, in the end, the marvels of art and engineering in this first American metropolis could not save it from its own collapse. For the descendants of the Teotihuacanos who populate the central highlands of modern Mexico, the spirit of this place still lives. They sense, perhaps, that the seed of greatness that once flowered here still resides within them. Each March, at the time of the spring equinox, they congregate at Teotihuacan. It is a time of sacred harmony between the city and the cosmos with which it is aligned. Multitudes of visitors from all over the world ascend the Pyramid of the Sun to await daybreak at this time of spiritual renewal.
It seems to me that I am seeing our ancestors. A feel of the people who lived at the time. And the grandiosity of the pyramids, of everything that they built with the materials they had. It's incredible, isn't it?
The stones in the temples speak. And they are speaking now because science is verifying now what our grandfathers knew 5,000 years ago.
I believe that the people of Mexico, when they have problems, when they are in crisis, look for an answer in their roots. These places are not dead. They are alive. They are part of our identity. They are part of our dignity. They are part of our pride. They are part of our values.
The descendants of Teotihuacan crave a kinship with their ancestors. For many, the secrets of the past may hold the key to their own destiny. Yet the ruins of this once great civilization remain silent and unyielding, tantalizing us with their legacies, enticing us to journey in search of history.
When Air Force Sergeant Bart Burns tried to speak publicly about a UFO he encountered, he was confined to quarters and shipped out.
They're not going to reward you for reporting an incident like that.
Now, for the first time in over 20 years, he tells sightings the whole story.
There's nothing I'd ever seen in aviation.
Then, the Batzel family has moved 11 times, not because they wanted to, but because they're being stalked by spirits.
3 out of the 4 of us got pushed down the flight of stairs by unseen hands.
Can our dreams reveal the future? These women say yes.
Exactly a month after I had this dream, Richard had a massive heart attack and died.
There are a lot of skeptics in the police force. And in London, those who work with this cop believe he sees crime in a different way.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. 3 Army MPs patrolling Hunter Airfield in 1973 see UFO streak across the base. It's a significant event, but not just because of what they saw. The Hunter incident marked the last time any active duty military personnel would be allowed to speak freely to the media about their UFO sightings. After Hunter, the Pentagon slammed the door on speaking out. Among the historic landmarks in and around the graceful southern city of Savannah, Georgia, is Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield. It was here, in the early morning hours of September the 8th, 1973, that a watershed UFO event occurred. The sighting of a brilliant oval craft by military police patrolmen was to be the first in a series of UFO encounters over a number of military bases throughout the United States. The Hunter event was also significant because it seemed to sound a death knell for the government's open door policy regarding UFOs. It's 2:30 a.m. Specialists 4th Class Bart Burns and Randy Shade are on a routine patrol of the base perimeter. It's easy duty. The base will be closed in just a few weeks and nearly everyone and everything has been shipped out. Suddenly, a bright light catches Sergeant Burns' attention. It hovers just above the treetops, then suddenly dives directly at the MP's car. The craft missed them by a whisker. Burns' radio transmission to the base dispatcher was picked up by the local media. Their request for interviews were quickly granted, and for 2 days, Burns and Shade's close encounter was front-page news. Then, 2 days after the event, the MPs stopped talking. And within 2 weeks, both were transferred to different bases.
That only tells me one thing. When they confined these MPs to the base and then shipped them out after the sighting, they were trying to cover that sighting up. Something very spectacular occurred there.
Investigator Lawrence Fawcett has been researching reported UFO intrusions at military bases for over 30 years. He has co-written a book on the subject titled The UFO Cover-Up. A former police lieutenant, Fawcett believes Hunter was the first in a series of incidents where vocal military personnel were punished.
I've seen this numerous times in other cases where in the beginning the people involved would begin talking only to be shut up later on or shipped out.
The government gag should have kept the Hunter UFO safely shrouded in obscurity, but the MPs were not the only people who saw the UFO. Savannah News Press editor Marcus Holland was an eyewitness. He reported seeing an oval craft streak across the sky, emitting red, green, and white light.
I've never seen a plane moving at that type speed, and there's just no plane that could fly that fast. I didn't know whether to be scared or not. I just, I said to myself, you know, could this be a UFO? You know, is that what I'm seeing? But I just had no idea. It just flashed across, went down, and to me it looked like it went down on the backside of Hunter Field, which would have been Perimeter Road area.
On September 8th, 1973, Jerry Smith and her son Albert, who was 9 years old at the time, were driving home to Savannah when they both saw the UFO.
As I was driving, all of a sudden, Albert looked up, and I said, "What's the matter?" And just then the car lit up. Oh, I mean, just bright red iridescent lights just lit the car up. And this thing was hovering over, and the colors were going around, and they were all blending in together, and they were very bright. I never saw anything like this that close, never in my whole life.
Newspaper articles, eyewitness accounts, and a few brief government documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act were all that Lawrence Fawcett could uncover about the Hunter incident during more than 20 years of investigation. Then, in 1995, a sightings researcher made an important discovery. He came across an article in a computer database that led him to former Sergeant Bart Burns. Fawcett had wanted to talk to the long silent MP for 2 decades, and now, finally, he would get his chance. Burns, now a commercial pilot living in a suburb of Chicago, agreed to a meeting in Savannah.
What did you think it was at that time?
I had no idea what it was. I didn't have a clue. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it before, so I couldn't even compare it to anything. You know, people don't believe you if you go to tell it. So I really haven't told that story in 20-some years. I just let it go. The first time I even thought about it was when I got a call from you people.
With Fawcett and a sightings investigative team, Bart Burns agreed to return to Hunter Army Airfield and retrace his route.
This is where we were doing that trolling that night. We actually were doing just like this. Same direction and everything. Broke right over these treetops right here. And at this point here, I ducked down and Randy swerved off. And we went off the road right back, probably about where that sign is there. Okay. And
you were heading in this direction?
Yeah, this is exactly how, this is this place, this is it. When I got back up and Randy was screaming whatever, what was that, what was that? We noticed the thing was now down. Senses were pretty well heightened at that point. As a matter of fact, I think I even had to tell Randy to leave his .45 holstered at that point. He didn't know what to do. Nobody really knew what to do. We didn't even know what it was. There's nothing I'd ever seen in aviation. It didn't have wings or propellers or jets. The rate of acceleration was far too rapid, absolutely no noise. And about then, the thing just took off, just gone. As we were driving back Perimeter Road back to the base, we weren't sure how everybody else was going to perceive this thing. So we said, well, we'll just tell the truth, and that's all we can do. I mean, if they believe us, they believe us. If they don't, hey, what are we going to do?
Taken on its own, the Hunter incident is an isolated case of a military base overflight by a UFO, witnessed by credible, highly trained military observers. But in the 2 years following this incident, Hunter became only the first in a series of military base overflights. Between 1973 and 1975, more than 75 bases reportedly had sightings of UFOs. But we will never have a full accounting of these UFO incidents because of what happened at Hunter Army Airfield.
Within the structure of the military and that, they're not going to reward you for reporting an incident like that. It just doesn't behoove anybody to be passing out medals for that one.
Sightings has also located Alexander Murray, the dispatcher who received the original UFO report. Sightings will bring you his interview on a future program. Investigator Larry Fawcett is still trying to locate the second MP who witnessed the UFO alongside Bart Burns. The former MP's name is Randy Shade, and in 1973, Shade was a Spec 4 at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia.
Next, a London police detective who knows the spirit of the law.
I'm questioning the spirit, and I tend to ask a lot of questions of those that are communicating with
me. In Great Britain, psychics have to be licensed and registered. Among the roster of registered psychics is Keith Charles, a man who believes that he has a sixth sense about where and how a crime has been committed. Charles uses this psychic ability every day in his work. He is the world's only registered psychic police constable. In metropolitan London, Detective Constable Keith Charles is working his beat. With a badge, a notebook, and what he believes is a supernatural gift, Keith Charles solves crimes for his department's Criminal Investigation Division. After hours, he uses those same powers in a completely different setting.
It is those that are in the spirit world, in heaven, that hopefully will communicate with me. And I will pass on those messages that they have to you.
Since he was 8, Charles has had clairvoyant visions, one which he believes led him to save the life of a drowning friend. He uses his psychic skills in seminars like this one, and on the job, where his uncanny powers of perception were evident the moment he started patrolling the streets of London.
People would come up from all over the world and all over the UK, and I would find myself being able to say, I know you, you've got a sister, you've got this, or you live near a church, and they were saying, how do you know this? And I really didn't know, but I was getting information from somewhere.
Charles points out that hard work and diligence drive his investigations, but he's not above asking for otherworldly help in some cases.
There are times when I will be investigating a crime that I've come to a dead end, and then I will look towards the spirit world and say to them, come on, give me a clue.
And sometimes the spirits in Charles's world lead him down a completely unexpected path.
It was a few years ago, whilst working in this district, that in this road here, a man was stabbed to death. We formed a murder squad, and I was one of the officers, and we were asked to suggest the names of possible suspects. I linked into Spirit and asked them if they could give me the name of the person responsible, and they did. They gave me the name of Ricky. However, he wasn't responsible for stabbing this man to death, but that same day, he killed a young lady, and later in the week killed another young lady.
Respect from fellow officers wasn't automatic. Charles earned their admiration after a series of startling revelations. Detective Inspector Alan Wilson called Charles in on a murder case after 2,000 hours of police work failed to turn up a suspect.
Our victim had left the party, had taken the girl to a taxi, had gone to the bank and got some money. None of these details were released, yet Keith knew them somehow. He told us descriptions of people who were in the building. He actually came up with 20 to 25 points, but he came up with information that we'd never released.
Even the most skeptical members of a naturally reticent force had to admit Keith Charles had a way of knowing beyond logic and reason.
There were a lot of skeptics on the police force, and when I told my other colleagues about it, even they, the hairs did stand up at the back of the neck somewhat, yeah.
And Charles was able to turn around a skeptical British press corps, including one journalist who ended up co-writing Keith Charles' autobiography.
I was extremely skeptical, yes. I was originally chasing what seemed to me like a very good news story. I mean, here you had a policeman who was also a psychic. It just had to be a great story. So I followed him around for quite a while after this and found him unbelievably impressive. And I don't say that lightly.
I've opened the door here, and I have a gentleman who says he's your husband. I have the name of James in the spirit world, which doesn't...
In his public appearances, Charles tries to bridge the gap between this world and the next, reassuring the living that their dead are in good hands.
As a psychic detective, I'm questioning the spirit, and I tend to ask a lot of questions of those that are communicating with me, because I feel if I could give somebody that knowledge and that comfort, knowing that their mum, their dad, brother or son is around them in the spirit world, that their life continues, that's fine. You have had a scar on your knee, please, Rachel?
Yeah.
Yes? They are aware of this, and they are bringing you confirmation that spirit do look after you. I now have a grandmother that links with you.
I have a scar on my knee. I was in a car accident and I've got quite a big scar on my knee, and that's when I realised that it was true and that he was telling the truth. And then when my grandmother came through, I've been waiting for my grandmother to come through and speak to me for a long time.
In 1994, Keith Charles's 20-year-old son Matthew was killed suddenly, and Charles says he had a life-changing communication with his son.
What I've learned from it is that it makes me more determined as a medium to be as genuine and sincere as you can, because I've lost somebody close to me and I know what it means. And I find it nice and comforting that Matthew can come and help me. He wanted to work with me in the physical, now he's working with me in the spiritual. And I say thank you to him for that, because it's lovely.
His life is a balancing act between faith in otherworldly forces and the cold reality of the streets.
It's a challenge every day. I enjoy my work as a medium, I enjoy my work as a policeman, and I'm very thankful that I'm able to do both, and that I've been given the opportunity to do both, and I love both of them.
In the United States, few police officers will work with psychics, let alone entertain the possibility that they may be psychic themselves. And yet words like blue sense and a cop's intuition are common. Is there really a difference in ability, or is the difference in name only?
Next, what you need to know to investigate UFO sightings. And meditation enters the workplace to help the bottom line.
Here are some of the stories sightings is following in the news. MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, headquartered in Seguin, Texas, has published a new field manual to assist would-be ufologists. The Mutual UFO Network, headquartered in Seguin, Texas, is home to the largest grassroots organization in the world devoted to the study of UFOs. The driving force behind the organization is its legion of volunteer field investigators.
At the present time, we have over 1,000 field investigators that go out and interview people that have had sightings, obtain the data, the facts, any material evidence, and so forth.
Every MUFON investigator is given a field investigator's manual, a step-by-step guide designed to help them document UFO sightings in their area. The guide offers practical advice about interviewing eyewitnesses and how to determine a UFO's dimensions and trajectory. David Spencer is MUFON's Deputy Director of Investigations.
I'm trying to put out a method that people can train themselves, that people can train others in investigating.
Spencer wrote the UFO Field Investigators Training Guide, a study course designed to help field investigators pass MUFON's entrance examination. He is also creating a database to catalog every reported sighting, a project MUFON believes will help them solve the mystery of unidentified flying objects. In South Korea, Volunteer forces are trying to get rid of something left behind after World War II. Not landmines or bombs, but the remnants of a curse based on the belief in a force called feng shui.
It is a system according to which good and bad places in space are determined by how male and female elements stand to each other at sites where the country's energy was supposed to come out of the Earth.
50 years ago, at specific sites throughout South Korea, the retreating Japanese army drove thousands of metal stakes like this one into the earth.
And they did that in order to disrupt the harmony that is necessary for the orderly conduct of a nation.
It was a final act of revenge. The Japanese implanted these stakes to forever poison the earth of Korea. They hoped it would prevent the Koreans from recovering after the war.
Since many Koreans are beginning to think again in terms of feng shui, to them it means removing the last vestiges of the Japanese occupation and also to make sure that Korea will continue to prosper.
In Pacific Palisades, California, Toby and Fred Weissman are the co-directors of the Maharishi Vedic School and Transcendental Meditation Program. Both have been trained by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who introduced Transcendental Meditation, or TM, to the West 35 years ago. Now, TM is being taught to major corporations all over the world.
The analogy we use is that a wise gardener doesn't water every leaf on the tree. Instead, he waters the root, and then all aspects of the tree flourish.
In Woodland Hills, California, Paul Werland is an engineer and the president of Real Estate Development Service. Werland has practiced Transcendental Meditation for 20 years.
It's probably been my single most effective management tool, in that not only does it create greater focus and capability of solving problems for myself personally, but because I pay my employees to meditate on company time, I find that it creates a similar quality in their thinking.
Werland's meditation policy is strictly voluntary. He offers to pay 50% of each employee's TM training fee and 100% if they decide meditation is not for them. So far, 80% of Werland's employees are practicing meditation.
I never knew that people meditate before I came to this company. And I noticed that people in this company are very calm, they are very concentrated and when they work, and there is no friction between people.
Studies conducted in the United States, Europe, and Japan show that major companies who have used meditation have increased productivity, reduced absenteeism, and an improvement in the physical and mental health of employees. Paul Werland claims that his profits have doubled. We'll have more stories from the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up on Sightings.
Claire Sylvia dreamed a death that saved her life.
I feel like I've been reborn.
Later, for 25 years, the Batzels have been on the move, trying to outrun a stalking spirit.
Some people have become very frightened of us and are no longer our friends.
Many researchers who study sleep and dreaming have come to believe that dreams are images created by the brain in random bursts. To ascribe any meaning to these unconnected images is nothing more than a parlor game or an outdated mode of psychoanalysis. But anyone who's ever had a dream, and that's all of us, has experienced the feeling that these images must mean something. The brain must be sending us a message.
I had a dream a couple weeks ago where I was at work and I was naked and I didn't even care. I had a dream where I was flying and the plane crashed into a large lake.
I'm late for an appointment, so I'm going to go by taxi. While sitting there in business clothes, I discover I'm wearing bedroom slippers.
We have many, many images while we're asleep, and the brain turns these images into stories.
The mind is a traveler, carrying us away to a different place, a different time, bending and reshaping reality. It is the secret world of dreaming. And while science may have discovered how we dream, they still don't know why we dream.
We have to realize that dreams are us. They're an expanded dimension of who we are. This is a level of consciousness like none other that everybody has access to.
Dreams have been valued for centuries as a source of insight, guidance, and even prophecy. While they sometimes have the power to frighten us, they can also inspire us.
Sometimes the ideas and the concepts we have when we are dreaming are just as useful or even better than what we have during wakefulness. Robert Louis Stevenson would go to his dreams for short stories. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde came to him in a dream. Mozart had dreams about his compositions.
Everybody dreams, but some people sleep so heavily they don't get a recall.
Therapist Betty Bethards became interested in dreams and their meaning after she herself had a series of prophetic visions following a near-death experience.
When you start listening and working with dreams, more and more teachers come to you. And they'll show you exactly what you're doing wrong, but they do it symbolically. If you take your dreams literally, they don't make any sense. But the symbolism does.
Carol Bianco sought out Betty Bethards for assistance in interpreting her dreams. Carol had become concerned after her dreams took on ominous overtones that she did not understand. Then one strange dream began taking over her waking hours as well. Carol could not interpret the connection between the key images in the dream, her deceased sister and brother-in-law, and her boyfriend Richard.
Dream happened over at my sister and brother-in-law's house, and I was looking out at the property below when I spotted Richard, the man that I loved and had been living with for 8 years. And I thought to myself, that's funny, what's he doing there? And so I followed him with my eyes, and I thought, well, I'll go open the front door and greet him. So I opened the front door, and instead, Stella and Bill drove up in this big white pickup truck. Exactly a month after I had this dream, Richard had a massive heart attack and died. When I remembered that dream, Rich had been in the dream and had gone out of sight, and that Stella and Bill, ironically, had come in a pickup truck. They came to pick him up.
Precognitive dreams are very much of a puzzle. We really don't know how this happens. Perhaps somebody gets information during the day that they don't recognize or realize.
Does the sleeping brain somehow know and understand things the waking mind does not? Claire Sylvia says yes. In 1983, she was diagnosed with a usually fatal disease, primary pulmonary hypertension. Before the heart-lung transplant that would save her life, Claire had a prophetic dream.
The one dream that I had, which really puzzled me, was I had to drink 4 glasses of milk a day, and that really puzzled me. And it wasn't until after the transplant, when I started taking my anti-rejection medicine, cyclosporin, that they would give it to me in 4 little cups of milk.
After her transplant, Claire's waking hours were filled with unusual thoughts she did not understand.
After a few days in the intensive care, they asked me the very profound question of, now that you've had this, what do you want more than anything? And what came from me was, I'd die for a beer right now. And I was startled as they were, because I didn't know where that came from. I'm not a beer drinker.
After her release from the hospital, the bizarre, inexplicable cravings intensified.
The first thing I did when I got into my car was find a Kentucky Fried Chicken place to get chicken nuggets. This is something I ordinarily don't do. I didn't even think about it.
Then Claire had a dream that told her why she was having thoughts that were not her own.
One of the first dreams that I had about 6 months after the transplant was of a young man that I was friendly with, and I was about to leave him to join some kind of performing group, and I turned around to come back to him and say goodbye to him, and as we came together, we kissed, and I felt like I inhaled him into me. When I awakened from the dream, I felt exhilarated, and I felt that it was the deepest breath that I had ever taken, and that this must have been my donor in my dream, whom I knew in my dream to be Tim.
The only information Claire had received about her donor was that he was an 18-year-old who had died in a motorcycle crash. The name Tim was only a dream.
It wasn't until over a year later, when I had met my donor family, and we were talking about
me feeling that I was living with the presence of another, that we were talking about the foods and the likes and dislikes, that I was changing, and they told me about Tim and the fact that one of his favorite foods was chicken nuggets, and they were on him in his motorcycle jacket the day he was killed, and they had to pull them out.
It is the uncanny intersection of the dream world and the real world that compels many to believe that there is more to dreaming than mere electrical impulse or chemical reaction.
The dream state is just one of many levels that's available to us. So if we can learn to use it and to integrate the insight, we will feel that our lives have more meaning, more direction, and we will certainly have a greater understanding.
Nearly everyone dreams, but not everyone remembers what they dream. If you'd like to improve your ability to recall dreams, Betty Bethard suggests sleeping with a pad and pencil beside your bed. Expecting to remember often triggers an actual memory.
Next, psychic Peter James contacts the spirits that have stalked a family for 25 years.
I'm not afraid of you. You don't belong here anymore.
The Batesel family believes that they're being stalked. For 25 years, the stalker has followed them from house to house, invading their personal lives and disrupting their daily routine. State police won't investigate. Neither will the FBI, because the stalker that the Batesels describe is not a man or a woman. It's a ghost.
It's a very uncomfortable feeling. You're living in a home and you're not really alone.
It's a feeling Beth Batesel has had for more than 25 years.
It's harrowing. It's tiring. It's very frustrating.
And it's a feeling the entire Batesel family shares. Since 1970, they have been on the run, pursued by strange, unseen forces that they do not understand.
Bob and I got married in 1970, and after a year of working and saving, we bought our first home in New Brunswick, and that's where this particular phenomena all began.
The Batesel family was very nice. They were very intelligent and good neighbors.
And according to the Rutgers University students who live there now, the Batesels' first home is not haunted.
I've never felt any strange feelings like anybody's watching me or anything. I never have any problem being alone in the house.
But it was quite a different story when this unassuming duplex was occupied by Beth and Bob Batesel.
At first we thought it was each other pulling tricks on each other, things being moved, lights being left on.
We were beyond skeptical, where if someone told us we heard noises upstairs, we would have said, sure you did, you know. What really sealed it, we were sitting and watching the news one evening, and all of a sudden there was an odor, and we were both kind of looking around, watching the news, but concentrating on the odor, and suddenly something came into our vision sight. And that was a cigarette. It was a lit cigarette, and it was floating down from our ceiling.
Beth and Bob moved out, started a family, and continued to be haunted.
The next significant house would have been in Clinton, New Jersey, where 3 out of the 4 of us got pushed down the flight of stairs by unseen hands.
As the children grew up, the ritual of packing, moving, and unpacking became just another part of life. As a family, they lived in 11 different houses throughout the state of New Jersey. Recently, they decided to try a more rural setting in the woods near Lake Ariel, Pennsylvania.
When we moved here, we thought that it was the best thing we could do for the simple reason that it was out of state.
But even putting 200 miles between themselves and their last home has not kept the unwanted hauntings off their trail. Some paranormal force has followed them here. Lee were the first to sense that something was terribly wrong in this house as well.
We were watching TV, and she said, look, and I turned and I looked, and I saw something in the window.
Lisa came tearing up the stairs, telling us something. She was babbling.
It was hanging by a rope with its eyes gouged out.
I knew nothing had happened to the kitten. I knew that what they had seen was an apparition of the kitten.
Over the years, Beth and Bob have consulted numerous paranormal investigators, including psychologist Carl Schlotterbeck.
I think that
a rich combination of things happening. One, I think that there are spirits attached to them as a family. They're great hosts for people in bodies and outside of bodies.
In their newest home, Schlotterbeck has taken hundreds of photographs and believes he's been able to capture evidence of spirit forms on film.
It was highly irregular because they are things that I've never seen in photographs before. Even the large light that looks like it would be lens flare still doesn't fit the typical pattern of lens flare because there wasn't a source of light.
The photos are an important document of the Batesville haunting, but for Beth, it feels like too little, too late.
The ordeal over these last 20-odd years has very much affected me and my whole family and those who we know. Some people have become very frightened of us and are no longer our friends.
Sightings ask psychic Peter James to consult with the Batesville family and try to make contact with the stalking spirits.
Hello? Give me a sign that you're here. Identify yourself.
Peter agreed with Carl Schlotterbeck's assessment. The Batesvilles were being followed by spirits, but Peter also sensed a strong force attached to this house in particular.
I get the letter R first, then George, and then the last name that has a Y in it. Okay?
That's correct. The original owner's name was George Robert Kenyon.
Did he die tragically? Did he die abruptly?
Yes, he did. He got killed by a train in 1937.
Who's here? Identify yourself. From what I got, just a brief glimpse of the female, it reminded me of you for just a quick moment.
The time when Bob saw an entity that looked like me and thought it was me, because it was clothed in something that I happened to be wearing
at the time.
I feel two females, one being a child, the other an adult, and I felt a lot of sadness from the child entity. And in the room where the bunk beds are in the basement, I felt a lot of sadness. I wanted to cry, and I wanted to be held, and I heard that music box, and I kept calling for Daddy, Daddy.
And just a few hours after Peter James's emotional connection with the spirit of an unknown child, a thin, eerie wail was heard, as if the spirit had perhaps felt the connection too.
Roughly speaking, it's
Is that Mommy?
Dad.
I hear, maybe I hear it just clairaudiently, but I hear this child saying, Daddy, Daddy, crying for Daddy.
The faint, plaintive cry of a child was barely audible. Here is that same sound again, greatly amplified.
Take it easy. Come forth, I'd like to help send you on. You don't belong here anymore.
That night, Peter claimed to make contact with both of the spirits, and he came to believe that Beth Batesville is a kind of spirit magnet, unwillingly attracting lost souls.
I think Beth is being stalked. I think she's being followed. She has an aura that I think attracts these entities to her.
Peter believes that Beth has a special kind of spiritual energy that is comforting to these spirits, and that while the haunting activity may appear frightening, the Batesvilles must understand that the forces here are not trying to harm them.
We've learned many things. We never thought that the houses we moved in were haunted. We always felt that they were following us. I don't believe that houses are haunted at all. I think people are haunted.
Since Peter James's visit to the current Batesville home, the unsettling haunting activity has subsided. However, the spirit they now know as George continues to make his presence felt. The family believes that he may never leave entirely, but they have a better understanding of how and why he haunts them.
Next, Sightings uncovers astonishing similarities between UFOs over Nellis Air Force Base and Mexico City.
There's also 4 little bumps on there.
Recently, Sightings brought you UFO footage smuggled out of a super-secret military installation in Nevada. Well, since then, the tape of the anomalous craft has been undergoing analysis by an image enhancement expert. As Sightings correspondent Carla Wold reports, this expert has found similarities between the Nellis craft and many of the UFOs sighted in the long-term flap over Mexico City.
Since 1991, an alarming number of UFOs have been sighted by thousands of people in the skies above Mexico City. Now the strange invasion seems to be spreading north.
On this unknown aircraft, T1 control doesn't know what type of aircraft it is either.
You are hearing the voice of the American military, monitoring a UFO as it hovers over a secret desert facility, part of Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada. As part of Sightings' ongoing investigation into the Nellis craft, the video is being analyzed by Defense Department subcontractor specializing in image enhancement. He believes the Nellis UFO bears an uncanny resemblance to many of the UFOs observed over Mexico City. Concerned that his startling conclusions could compromise his top-level security clearance, his identity is being concealed.
This is
Nellis Air Force.
Right. This is the Nellis Air Force Base range footage. Now, this piece of video right here was taken in 1991 during the eclipse in Mexico City.
What specifically did you notice that was similar?
There appears to be 4 little bumps on there, and there's also 4 little bumps on this guy. We did do some extensive work on this spine area, this ridge along the top, and along this area here. And when we enhance these areas, it reconstructs very similar.
Is it this extreme black, this pitch black circle on each of these objects that sort of was the whistle for you that sounded the alarm, like that there might be some similarity between these two objects?
Yes, yeah. That area was puzzling to do analysis because it appeared to be so highly absorbent of light. Most objects illuminated in this bright a sky, even surfaces that are way down on the bottom out of the sunlight in deep shadow, still reflect light back to the camera. This and it falls off very rapidly to pure black down the center. Very, very black, what we call super black.
Do you know any aircraft? Are you familiar with any aircraft that would look like that?
No.
In the sky?
We looked at it in comparison with all known types of military and commercial, but we were unable to find any wings or anything on the geometry of this.
Each UFO has a black ridge center, an identical profile, and a white diffuse shape shadowing the core. But these are not the characteristics that excite our expert, who's trained to analyze minute detail in satellite photos.
We took some video from a golf ball coming up through the sky and down to the green, produces a similar object to a UFO. It's a small white dot in the sky. We were able to go to those images and with very minimal work, able to bring out the dimples in the golf ball in flight. When we look at these images, we can't get the definition of the geometry that we would expect for objects as close as this one was to a very good camera. The objects by nature are fuzzy or undefined or unclear. This one was shot by a very expensive tracking camera on a very stable mount. This one was shot by a handheld consumer video camera. And there's no difference in resolution, and we find that puzzling, that no matter how many of these images you get from whatever source, they all have that ball of cotton syndrome or that fuzziness to them.
When they were seen only over Mexico City, it was a phenomenon. Now that the activity of seemingly identical UFOs has spread into American airspace, it can only be called a trend. The sightings investigation continue.
The Mexico City mass sightings continue unabated. After more than 4 years of persistent UFO encounters, there is still no consensus on what or who is responsible for these unexplained aircraft. I'll bring you my own report from Mexico City on a future edition of Sightings.
If you've had a paranormal experience, please write to us at Sightings. Sightings can also be contacted at America Online at keyword Sightings. At the Sightings Forum, download images, sounds, and QuickTime clips. Also, join us daily in our chat room, live on AOL.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.
Next on Sci-Fi, Dark Shadows.
Are we dealing with an epidemic?
A bold experiment.
We recombine termite and mantid DNA to create a
On this edition of Sightings, it began as a mysterious phenomenon in a small Midwestern town and soon became the most famous haunting in America.
Oh my God, look, it's forming right there.
Now, Sightings reconnects with the Heartland ghost.
Sally, I'm back.
These men were there when the most deadly missiles in our nuclear arsenal were mysteriously rendered useless.
Just looked at each other and said, I don't understand this.
They're convinced UFOs are to blame.
The only thing I could think was, oh my God.
This is amazing.
Then, has the mystery of crop circles been solved?
If this video is genuine, it is the Holy Grail.
Why music may be the best medicine.
You can learn to use your own voice to heal yourself.
And Nostradamus' final prediction for this millennium.
Welcome to Sightings. I'm Tim White. For the past 3 years, Sightings has brought you exclusive interviews and video of a bizarre haunting in America's heartland. Along with the poltergeist and entity cases, the Heartland ghost is now considered one of the greatest unsolved hauntings in American history. The haunting victims moved out long ago. More recent tenants have also moved away. The house is empty now. Or is it?
Physically felt that?
Yeah, that hurt. Oh my God, look. It's forming right there.
I have 2 scratches.
Look at that.
There's a little girl that's standing right there.
Sally? Is that your name, Sally?
MC.
Yeah, we got a new scratch.
Look, one's starting to bleed.
It began with a series of eerie occurrences that fascinated rather than frightened this young family somewhere in America's heartland. Apparitions appeared in photographs. Lights were turned on by an unseen hand. Incidents described as spontaneous combustion. And even I felt the inexplicable cold spots that would emanate without warning. Strange, but not threatening to Deborah, Tony, and their baby boy. Mysterious, but not malevolent, until the bloody scratches started to appear.
I can feel it. How did that happen?
You don't know.
Sally?
Look at that.
She does this when she's upset.
An unprecedented sightings investigation was launched. For more than a year, paranormal investigators made repeated trips to the home. Data was collected, photographs analyzed. There was even an exorcism, all in an effort to explain the unexplainable. For world-renowned parapsychologist Carrie Gaynor, who had investigated both the entity and poltergeist cases, the Heartland ghost was unique.
During the last 20 years, I've investigated about 850 cases, and during that time, I have never come across anything like this.
Tony said that the ghost had appeared in human form only once. He saw a girl in turn-of-the-century dress, the spirit of a child named Sally, one psychic told the family. When Sightings searched town records to see if such a child ever lived in the 130-year-old house, we discovered a startling confirmation on microfilm. A little girl named Sally had lived in the house, and she had died under mysterious circumstances in 1905. It was nearly 2 years ago that psychic Peter James found the grave of that little girl and then claimed to have made contact with her. Now, Sightings has asked Peter to return to the Heartland to find out if Sally is still home.
Well, it looks the same. Not much has changed.
Peter entered the house with some trepidation, remembering his last encounter with the spirit he too calls Sally.
Sally, I'm back.
Retracing the psychic path of 2 years ago, Peter recalled his own painful encounter with the destructive, vengeful force in the house.
This was the room where I got my face burned. Something's burning my face, like right now. Wow. When I walked through the house, I felt that some of these so-called hot spots that I was able to identify the last time I was here, for example, remained much the same.
And nowhere was that more evident than in the nursery, a century-old room where generations of children had played and dreamed.
Sally, make your presence known, Sally. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that she is here. None whatsoever. I sense the same kind of activity, however, to a lesser degree, and I would attribute that to the fact that the young man that lived here is not here, and I believe that Sally, or the perpetrator, if you will, that did all the scratching, had a thing for him, that disliked him immensely. But the activity remains the same. Sally is still here and active.
Although Tony stayed away from the house on this visit, Deborah offered to bring us up to date on her husband.
He went through an awful lot each time the sightings crew came up, and it was quite traumatizing to him. And he's now had a cooling off, a healing period where he can feel free without, with the knowledge that nothing is going to sneak up on him and scratch him.
In Sally's eyes, this is her home. And when you enter the domain, if you will, of a ghost, they let you know that you're invading their space. So the fact just happened to move in and bumped into Sally, literally. Things that go bump in the night, well, she bumped back.
And Deborah has had lingering fears that Sally will come to haunt their new home and torment Tony again.
Today, I had Peter come over and walk through our now permanent house to kind of check over whether we are being bothered over there.
I got an immediate sense that it would be very unlikely that they would have any kind of a haunting activity in the new house. The new house is clean, because I believe that houses are haunted and not people.
As darkness fell on this infamous house, the sightings team wondered, was Sally gone? Or was she now a sweeter, shyer spirit? Or perhaps had yet to show her dark side?
Where are you, Sally? Come out now. Sally, make your presence known now. Talk to me. Sally, I'm going home now. Alone.
Then, just as the sightings team began to wrap things up, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically.
Sally, you here? Yeah, it is cold here. Yeah, it is quite cold here. Whoa, yeah.
It just got cold sunlight.
Yeah, it did, yeah. Sally? Yeah, oh, feel this, feel this. Oh, it's real cold right here now, feel that.
Just then, a chilling sensation startled director Steve Abramson.
Okay?
My pants are cold right here.
You're cold?
It's like, feel my pants here. See if they feel cold back there.
Yeah, they do. Lift up your pant leg.
There's no pain or anything, it's just a cool feeling.
Turn around.
But I don't feel any breeze here, but my whole leg feels cool.
I don't think so.
Scratch.
Okay.
Right here? Here?
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm seeing.
There's a definite mark back there. Sally, be nice.
Was this a coincidence or a warning? A reminder to the team that Sally can be vicious when she wants to be.
If she wanted to attack you violently, believe me, she's very capable of a very violent and a very abrupt attack.
According to Peter James, Sally will haunt this house in the heartland for many years to come, or until she realizes that her physical body no longer exists and her spirit can finally rest in peace.
The house remains empty. Some prospective tenants have been interested in renting the place, excited by the home's national reputation. But renter beware. Sally, as we know, doesn't always like her roommates.
Next, did UFOs shut down part of our nuclear defense? Speak out.
He and other guards had seen UFOs flying.
Right now, somewhere in America, there are more than 7,000 nuclear warheads poised at the ready. The possibility that any one of these sleeping giants might be compromised is unthinkable. But think again. There is evidence that someone, or more accurately something, has tampered with our nuclear capability. And that something may not be of this world.
In the event of a nuclear attack, this is what's supposed to happen. But on March 16, 1967, America's first line of defense was tampered with. It started at a missile launch site, codenamed November, near Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. For several hours, missiles loaded with nuclear warheads switched off, and no one could figure out why. Robert Salas was deputy crew commander that day, one of a two-man team inside one of the missile control bunkers, 60 feet underground.
I got a call from one of my security guards upstairs. He said that he and other guards had seen UFOs flying over the area. I didn't think he was serious. Basically, we hung up.
When the stakes are global thermonuclear war, only men and women of the highest physical and mental standards need apply. Salas had made the grade, but now he had to begin questioning those around him.
About 5 minutes later, he calls back, and this time he's agitated. He's obviously frightened. He said that there was a UFO hovering just outside the front gate, and it was glowing red. It was saucer-shaped, and he was very frightened. Within a minute or two of the second call, the missiles started shutting down or going off alert. We were basically shocked to see our missiles going no-go sequentially. In other words, bing, 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 bing. They just started going down. The only thing I could think was, oh my God.
Just 12 hours later, at another launch site, codenamed Echo, 20 miles away, Launch Commander Don Crawford learned that the 37-ton Minuteman missiles under his command also went down.
We just looked at each other and said, I don't understand this. How could this happen? There is no command in the capsule to turn them off. There was no switch, no off switch. They did not break. They just never broke. And I never saw an off alert missile in the 3.5 years I was a crew member.
3 weeks earlier, Crawford had also taken a panicked phone call from a security guard who claimed to have seen a UFO over the silo.
He was a very terrified young man, and he could not identify what he was seeing. In other words, this was not an airplane. It was way too low and too close, and it also didn't go away. I guess I finally convinced him that if the whatever it was came inside the fence, he had my authority to shoot, which made him feel really good. But he said, sir, I don't really think that'll do much good.
Then, more than 3 hours after the missiles went offline, with no repair work having been done, the missiles simply came back on, as though nothing had ever happened.
It just started back up normally like they had installed it from the factory. And so they found no broken pieces, no broken cables, no, nothing like that. It just started back up.
Incredibly, neither Robert Salas nor Don Crawford were ever told what had happened at the other's launch site and wouldn't compare notes for nearly 30 years. When they did, the mystery only deepened. 2 launch sites, a dozen missiles, and unidentified flying objects.
They had all the contractors involved in these studies, and they couldn't figure out what had happened. The system designers couldn't figure out what had happened. Nobody could figure out what happened. It lends credibility to the fact that something very very unusual happened.
From the day he filed his official and top secret report, Robert Salas has had nagging questions about what exactly happened on that March day in 1967. 30 years later, Salas still wants answers and has enlisted the help of people like Jim Klotz, who is an expert in the procurement of previously classified military documents. Just recently, they struck pay dirt with this report. It is the Air Force's official and now declassified investigation of the Echo and November incidents.
The strategic missile wing history that we obtained specifically lists what was eliminated, and it concludes that they were mystified. They looked at faults in the computers or the guidance systems of the missiles themselves. They looked into electromagnetic pulse, which is really what they believe was the cause. Now, as far as I know, the documents show the capability of introducing such a pulse in the shielded cable system didn't exist at that time.
There's one section in the report that says they interviewed security guards and they denied the UFO incidents. I know, for example, that I briefed my commander on the UFO incidents. The Echo flight crew not only briefed their commander, but had to brief SAC headquarters on the entire incident, and they had logs. And so I know for a fact that those statements in that historical document are false.
Some researchers believe that the shutdown may have been a training exercise to test the mettle of the launch crews. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Rowles says no way.
It's just beyond any comprehension that they would do that because of the detriment to the deterrence factor. You don't degrade your ability to fight a war or a war game exercise.
And, says Rowles, who is an expert in military procedure, the integrity of the security force on duty that day would have been impeccable.
The young Air Force security police at all times, in association with the security of these silos, were given lethal control where they could go ahead and use lethal force if need be. So they had to be very stable themselves.
Robert Salas has also tracked down Ray Fowler. In 1967, he was working for Sylvania, one of the companies that built the Minuteman system.
All I know is that our people and the Boeing people went to the site and tried to simulate what had happened. But they were never able to trace the reason for the flight going down.
When Robert Salas wrote an article about the Echo incident, former launch commander Don Crawford read it and realized he was not alone. And then sightings brought them together for the first time in 3 decades.
It's been doing for 30 years.
It's been a long time. I remember you now.
Finally, Crawford and Salas could talk freely on a subject they had once sworn to keep secret. Then Salas shared his research.
You know, that's interesting that you get together something from the Air Force that specifically says it happened.
It happened. Absolutely.
Both men agree that the 2 silo incidents must continue to be investigated.
I'm a scientist. I think when you know something, you tell it. You write it down. For a number of years, we couldn't have done that. It was classified. Now that it's not classified, there's no reason not to put it public.
Certainly, if the UFO, whatever it is, has the capability of shutting down our missiles as they did, it's in the public interest to make this an open debate as to what it all means.
Bob Salas's testimony is an important first step, but more people who were in the military, people who were there, need to come forward before the whole truth can be known about what really happened March 16th, 1967.
Next, NASA's plans to study the face on Mars. And later, is this historic footage of a crop circle taking shape?
Here are some stories sightings is following in the news. Are you a true believer? How sure are you of the existence of Bigfoot or ghosts or the possibility of extraterrestrial contact in our lifetime? Well, now, before you answer, watch this report about a London betting firm that wants you to put your money where your mouth is.
In London, England, bookmakers like William Hill are willing to give you odds on just about anything.
I suppose it goes back to the early 60s when we first were offered a bet by somebody who wanted to place £10 that man will walk on the moon by the end of that decade, and basically we offered him 1,000 to 1, pushed him out of the office, and never thought we'd see him again. Unfortunately, we did in July 1969 when he won £10,000 from us.
But the publicity they received from that bet was priceless, and now William Hill will take bets on everything from the date of alien contact to conclusive proof of Bigfoot, and the odds might surprise you.
There are a number of bets for which we'll offer standard odds, for example. Bigfoot seems to run concurrent with Yeti in our betting odds, and that's currently the same price as Nessie at the moment, 500 to 1, that within a year of your bet, conclusive proof will be forthcoming. We currently offer 33 to 1 that NASA will officially confirm the existence of intelligent extraterrestrial life on or before December the 31st, 1999. We'll give you to the end of the century, and of course that doesn't have to be a little green man.
As sightings of UFOs, Bigfoot, and Nessie fluctuate, so do the odds. However, there is still one paranormal bet yet to be wagered.
The one that surprises me we've never had, and I'm not quite sure why, is for conclusive proof of the existence of ghosts. Nobody has ever, in the 20 years that I've been taking these type of bets, asked for that, and I'm very surprised that they haven't, because I would like the challenge of coming up with a wording for the bet that would enable someone to aim at getting that conclusive proof.
William Hill bookmakers won't say how much money has been wagered on the supernatural so far, only that it is substantial. In Washington, D.C., NASA officials have announced that their Mars probe will photograph the Martian region where many claim to have seen a giant face.
It is our plan to, within our normal sequencing, whenever we go over the Cydonia region, to collect images. And it is also our plan to put those images on the internet upon acquisition. We think we have done all the things that we can possibly do within the framework of this mission to try to address this question of the face on Mars.
The hope is that new detailed pictures will quell rumors that NASA is hiding knowledge of seemingly man-made structures on Mars. By transmitting pictures from the Global Surveyor directly onto the World Wide Web, NASA hopes to solve the face on Mars mystery once and for all. We'll have more stories in the news next time. Now, here's what's coming up as Sightings continues.
Does this video solve once and for all the mystery of crop circles?
The crop circles are being made by someone other than Earth people.
Or is it just a fabulous fake?
We have to be extremely careful.
Sightings talks to the experts.
You're about to see some of the most amazing home video that's ever reached us here at Sightings. It was shot by an amateur photographer standing on a bluff above an English wheat field. It may be the first real evidence that crop circles are formed by extraterrestrial forces. Or it may be a hoax. But if it is a hoax, it's a very good one. Watch carefully. You are about to see the creation of a crop circle.
This is amazing.
If this video is genuine, it is the Holy Grail, because we have something that absolutely proves crop circles are formed without human intervention.
I can see the temptation to want to run with it and believe it simply at face value, but that will do all of us no good whatsoever. So we have to be extremely careful.
World-renowned crop circle experts Colin Andrews and Peter Sorensen were among the first to see the extraordinary video. They were astonished because the amateur home video seems to prove the researchers' hypotheses that there is a connection between crop circles and the so-called mystery lights, often sighted in the same area.
The cameraman is pointing his camera towards a wheat field. Into the right-hand side of the frame suddenly appears two small spheres, moving from right to left. The spheres then take a course of a semi-ring around the field. Suddenly, in the center of the field, the central circle is formed, and 6 circles on the ends of the arms are also in position. The third phase comes when 2 more spheres appear from the east, and then the connecting pathways, the arms, drop into position.
I must say, at the very beginning, I thought, wow, this feels right. You know, this guy seems genuine about everything. And it wasn't until I began to watch it frame by frame that I began to be suspicious of things.
Sorensen is particularly suspicious because the man holding the camera seems to know what will happen before it does.
A very important thing to look for on this video is that during this key shot, the camera seems to be wiggling a little bit like it's a handheld camera. If it is a handheld camera, how come he didn't follow the lights when they go off screen? Instead, he's already exactly where the crop circle is going to be.
Could someone have created this videotape using computer graphics and other special effects? Jim Pilatoso is an animation expert who has analyzed the video.
There's no evidence that this is a hoax. I'm not saying that it's real. I'm saying that there's no evidence of a hoax.
The people I've worked with in computer animation studios could do this kind of thing in about 4 hours.
People are fooled by what complex and simple computers can do. This is like that. We're trying to determine, like in Forrest Gump, if Forrest Gump was really shaking hands with John Kennedy, it's not enough to say, oh yes, it's a fake. Well, how was it fake?
Unlike other analysts, Pilatoso claims to have no personal bias in this case.
When we test video, the temptation is to go into it with the presupposition, it's real and I'm going to find a way to prove it. Or the temptation is to say, it's a hoax and I'm going to prove how it's a hoax. What we have to do is enter into the testing to gather data, and then we can draw a conclusion.
What is certain, of course, is that the formation, the pattern we see forming on this video did appear. I mean, it is physical. It was there in the field. We've seen it, measured it at ground level. We've filmed it from the air. It is real. That is undoubtedly true. But the team working with me that entered that field, they didn't like what they saw. They saw many footprints. They saw compression of the soil. They saw plants that were heavily damaged and a spiraling symmetry, which was highly suspicious.
If the tape is a hoax, Pilatoso says, it was not created with computer tricks.
Every camera, whether home or professional, every tape deck has areas in between the frames, just like in a strip of movie film. There's space in between the frames. In video, there's information in that space, and that information is called the vertical interval. There is no evidence in the vertical interval of digital processing, meaning no paint box, no computer, no tampering with the signal.
And there is no evidence that the photographer has made substantial financial or personal gains, bolstering his legitimacy.
What we hear is the person we assume to be the camera operator says, "This is amazing."
This is amazing.
But when we analyze the voice using psychological stress evaluation, this person's a little bit nervous.
This is amazing.
And the nature of the breathing changes rapidly, as if the body was introduced to a moment of stress. Point of the story. Doesn't seem like this guy is lying or acting.
Sorensen is not as charitable.
Suddenly we click to this fairly tight, limited motion shot, and now he's saying, this is amazing. Now, frankly, if it was me, I'm using four-letter words to say, wow, this is fantastic. You know, that's what I would have been saying. But he says, oh, this is amazing. I mean, how? That's too British.
But what has the photographer to gain? He hasn't made a bundle or become a media sensation. Why create such a hoax?
This is an important tape, because what you see on the tape represents either a hoax or it represents a truly significant clue, a key, a demonstration into what this means. There's tremendous evidence that the crop circles are very meaningful, very significant, and are being made by someone other than Earth people.
I guess I want to believe Israel, but we must deal with the facts. We don't want to see a myth in the making, and that is what this might turn out to be.
The problem with the crop circle video is the same problem researchers are having with the Roswell autopsy film. The photographers refuse to come forward publicly. This is perhaps the strongest case for the video and the film being hoaxes. If you shot historic, legitimate footage, wouldn't you want people to know who you are?
Next, the extraordinary healing power of music.
He could not speak. He could not read. He could not write. We were starting from ground zero.
When a team of researchers found the perfectly preserved body of a Stone Age man, the world-famous Iceman, they also found the tools of his meager existence. He was carrying a hunting knife and a flute. Music, it seems, was as essential as food. The mysterious power of music continues to sustain us to this day, and there is new proof that it can also heal.
With its drums and chants, this may sound like the latest trendy New Age workshop. But in fact, this is clinical research being conducted at the University of Louisville School of Medicine.
In every culture that I have ever heard about, music was a part of healing ceremonies, of healing rituals, and of ceremonies that celebrated life passages.
Dr. Cash is a musicologist and one of the nation's few music-centered psychotherapists. She studies and documents the physical and psychological effects of music. Dr. Cash calls music her drug of choice and speculates that music stimulates the release of powerful therapeutic chemicals inside the human body that can promote healing.
Music can begin to relax the body to the point where natural healing processes can begin to take place. But when people get so stressed out, a lot of these healing processes are cut off. You can learn to use your own voice to heal yourself.
Dr. Cash has seen the healing effects of music in her patients with stress, depression, anxiety, addictions, and even stroke patients and those with Alzheimer's disease. Music, it seems, can also mean the difference for many people with language and learning disabilities. At the Sound Listening and Learning Center in Pasadena, California, therapists use a method based on the work of French physician Alfred Tomatis to stimulate language development.
The basic premise of our work is that the voice can only produce what the ear can hear.
Center Director Dr. Billy Thompson works with many children who are language impaired. Even though Katie Brady started talking clearly and intelligently when she was only 9 months old, by age 2, Katie had regressed severely.
Oh.
Her parents tried to encourage Katie to speak intelligibly, reading and speaking until they were hoarse, but Katie could not imitate normal speech.
With what? In the bathtub.
The grandparents actually said it first. Do you think she's hearing? Do you think she's hearing us?
You see the ABC song?
Testing showed that Katie wasn't deaf. And when she stopped talking completely after the death of her grandmother, therapists suggested Katie's problems were psychological.
As we were rocking her to sleep that night, she said, "Grandmother is dead, grandmother is dead." We put her to bed, and then the next morning she did not have any language.
Katie had uncontrollable tantrums. She chewed on books, threw things, and grew more and more isolated.
Katie was never invited to a birthday party. She would be kicking the wall, tearing at her clothes, screaming at the top of her lungs. We call that year the dark year, the black year.
The Bradys were told Katie had attention deficit disorder. 2 doctors insisted she was autistic, but Katie's parents saw signs that she could speak clearly. Her mother noticed it first when Katie began imitating the high-pitched voice of cartoon characters.
She would memorize things from the television. In particular, one of her first phrases was from the movie Bambi. And she would say, "You can call me Flower if you want to. I don't mind."
Katie improved enough during 2 years of speech therapy to enter kindergarten, but her parents kept looking for help. When they discovered the Tomata Center, extensive testing pinpointed sounds that Katie's brain was not processing. She was missing the mid-range tones, the ones we use in normal conversation.
When we get the sound through the equipment, we're hearing it differently than you and I would hear it in a normal symphony or radio show. It's being processed in order to make the ear more effective.
A sophisticated electronic ear manipulated music like Mozart and Gregorian chants to target sounds Katie was missing.
One day after session, Katie said, "I think I have a new brain." And she was really experiencing a different way of perceiving her world.
Like when I was like a baby, I didn't even know how to talk.
When Katie learned to hear the mid-range tones, she began to process normal speech.
You get those ear muffs and you listen to some music, and then when you're done, you listen to some other things, like this lady says, repeat my words. Flower, flower. If they don't hear a voice, they just try again and try again and try again until they got your voice.
She was taking a shower and she was singing. And she was singing up and down and I love my voice in this voice that my husband and I had never heard. And my husband and I are outside the door crying and crying because you hear this wonderful, wonderful voice coming from someone that had no voice.
Now I know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me?
In October 1995, Diana Pierce received an unexpected and devastating phone call. Her husband, John, an Arizona air traffic controller, had suffered a catastrophic stroke. They had only been married 3 years.
Oh, he was the man of my dreams. All my life I've been looking for him. I was very much in love. If you can believe that you can really fall in love for the first time in your life, at 47, it happened to me.
The prognosis was bleak. John would survive, but he would suffer severe lifelong disabilities.
When I took him into rehab, we found that John had lost all of his learning centers. He could not speak, he could not read, he could not write, he could not spell, he could not do math. We were starting from ground zero, as if he was going back into kindergarten.
Before his stroke, John was talkative, social, and articulate. But after the stroke, all that was gone.
4 months later, I called my mother and I said, I want my husband back. I want him to talk to me again. And Mom said, nobody can do that but you. You have to help him.
I told her, okay, tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And she did it.
Diana structured her own exhausting treatment regimen. And when she discovered a Tomata Center in Phoenix, John became the first stroke patient to work with Dr. Thompson.
When John first came to the center, he was not able to say what he was thinking.
In this method, music is used to stimulate and speed up brain functions that lead to speech. From music, John moved on to simple speech, and then to the rich language of life before his stroke.
Success.
Good.
I don't learn that one day. It may take 2 or 3 days. And then all of a sudden, bam, I get something. Very idea.
Every day I would get up and I would come and I would sit on the couch and I would say to myself, if only he could come out and say to me, good morning, babe. He does now.
The power of music is mysterious, a primal force for all humankind. And now modern science applied to the old ways is helping to heal for those who are willing to listen. The people in this story are living proof that there's a mysterious link between speech, memory, and music. Researchers say this is just the beginning. One day they envision a whole new range of music therapies for many kinds of brain disorders.
Next, the alarming details of Nostradamus' final prediction.
Nostradamus is saying that something will come from the sky.
previously reported on sightings, many of the 16th century predictions of Nostradamus are coming true in the 20th century. The prophet had a penchant for predicting wars, plagues, and disasters, so it's not surprising that one of his predictions for the year 2000 has a lot of people weird.
L'an 1999, in the year 1999, the 7th month, from the sky will come a great king of terror. So it is said, and so it will be.
This prediction was made more than 400 years ago in a simple 4-line poem called a quatrain. Nostradamus wrote 1,000 quatrains during his lifetime, but only 8 make predictions for specific dates. 7 dates have passed so far, and 7 predictions have come true. Now, only quatrain 72, the prediction for 1999, remains.
Nostradamus is saying that something will come from the sky. Not in the sky like an airplane, it's coming from out of the sky. It has to come from space. And the only thing that could possibly come from space, okay, that could produce terror would be something that's going to hit the Earth. We're talking about a comet, an asteroid, a meteor, something along those lines.
Author Stephan Paulus believes that quatrain 72 foretells a grim fate for Earth as it enters the next millennium. He has detailed his alarming scenario in the book Nostradamus 1999, Who Will Survive?
Nostradamus indicates that a comet will make a close approach to the Earth. The Earth will pass through the tail of the comet. A meteor 1/4 mile in diameter will actually hit the Earth. What would happen? The energy equivalent of 133,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs going off instantaneously in the same place. You will end up with an earthquake of a magnitude 14 or greater. You'll end up with a tsunami, a tidal wave, perhaps 100, 200 feet in height. The destruction is just going to be enormous.
According to Paulus, quatrain 72 is only one in a sequence of 200 quatrains that tell the story of Earth's demise, but how and when it will happen has been obscured.
Nostradamus indicates that there was an original sequential order, which he confused. He mixed up his quatrains. He did not number them. He wrote them on individual sheets of paper and just took them and just threw them up around the room and numbered them in the order that he picked them up in. So it was truly a random ordering system. I've made an attempt to take a group of about 200 quatrains and resequence them, perhaps into the order he wrote them in.
In one quatrain, Nostradamus predicts that a solar eclipse will hide the comet's approach. And Paulus says it is not a coincidence that astronomers calculate a solar eclipse for August 11th, 1999. If the comet does hit, will it mean the end of the world? Since the Earth is 75% water, an ocean impact is likely, and UCLA meteorologist Dr. James Murakami says that's good.
The first immediate effect would be, say, a giant tidal wave affecting coastal areas. If it occurs in the Atlantic, it'd be affecting like North America, Europe, Africa, South America. But these would be fairly transitory and it'd probably occur in the first 24 hours of impact.
The noted science writer David Brin reminds us that Nostradamus' predictions are subject to much interpretation.
They are art. They are a creation of metaphors that cause and stimulate thinking. They're not, I don't think they were ever meant to be literal predictions.
Brin may be skeptical about Nostradamus' vision of a catastrophic millennium, but he does acknowledge that life in the Milky Way is not risk-free.
The kind of asteroid that killed off the dinosaurs, well, we know roughly the odds of that because it happened 65 million years ago and hasn't happened since. So the odds, I would say, are roughly 1 in 100 million in any given year.
Still, Paulus is convinced that the collision of man and mineral is inevitable.
NASA provided some statistics that said it is more likely that you will die in a comet crash into the Earth than you will die in an airplane. But nobody's worried about comets. But when they do happen, millions, perhaps billions of people will die.
Nostradamus may have predicted a devastating comet impacting the Earth, but he did not predict our ability to divert an inbound celestial body using Star Wars technology. And that's something that is on the drawing boards right now.
If you've had a paranormal experience, please write to us at Sightings. Sightings can also be contacted at America Online at keyword sightings. Download images, sounds, and QuickTime clips from Sightings episodes. On the internet, access information about sightings and the paranormal at sci-fi.com/sightings.
Until next time, remember, no mystery is closed to an open mind. For Sightings, I'm Tim White.
Next on Sci-Fi, Dark Shadows. Fact.
Invasion is a hoax.
Or science fiction.
There really are aliens on the moon?
China in the sci-fi premiere of Alien Fury. Tomorrow at 9 p.m. on Sci-Fi.
Alright, I gotta end this stream here soon, real soon. I gotta get going. Pay the bills. Real life calls, unfortunately. I don't know what to do with this guy right now. Oh, yeah, right here. One more term, and I'm out of here. Boy, oh boy. That was some interesting stuff. I feel like someone is trying to communicate to me through everything, because I had like this whole internal dialogue going on. Like, I'm getting something completely different out of everything I'm putting on. Of all these documentaries, like, yeah, I can't. There's a dialogue going on between me and this other, the other. We'll say that. The other. Yeah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. That guy. So yeah, I conquered all of Poland. Yeah, and I've been getting these Georgian. This is Tamar of Georgia over here. And I've been getting her cities by getting them to revolt, and then they become free cities, and then I conquer them. Like, you see this fist here? That means that that city there, Caspy or whatever, is going to revolt soon. I got 2 spies coming to Batumi, one to neutralize the governor and one to create unrest. Each civilization can only have 6 governors. You have to earn them. So they can only have them in 6 cities. I have 6. Everybody has 6. But they're using theirs at the border because I'm doing this bread and circuses act. I'm not going to get into all that. It's bad. I feel like, I don't know, it's insidious. But yeah, she's at war with the guy to the north, Jayavarman here of the Khmer people. She nuked Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, his two main cities. Well, this is the capital over here, Yashodharapura. Yeah, do you know that? So yeah, when I played Suryavarman, the Khmer civilization before, these city names were the same, and Yashodharapura, that's of course named after Krishna's mother, Yashoda. Yeah, the city of Yashoda. So that's cool. That's why I stuck with playing the Khmer civilization before. Plus, I got used to the play style. That's why I'm playing Germany again. I really like the style, the play style. Yeah. I'll just get this ready to end the turn, and then I'm going to save it. Don't take long though, because now I'm at the point where we're just doing this commercial hub investments in other Civ games. It was called Capitalization, but I think they may have an anti-capitalist agenda here. So yeah, they made this law that companies can be held liable for what users using their platform say and do on their platform. So, Facebook is real touchy, and they will bar you from posting for anything. If anybody, almost anything. Definitely, if you mention the Jews. You could just write the word Jews in a post, and somebody would report it, and then you get banned for life. You know, they say you want to know who you're controlled by, or you can't criticize. I never really believed in the Jewish conspiracy, but it is really like way over the top how overreactive the establishment is. Like it's actually at the point of being suspicious. Because I made this post, I made a comment on a post, and I mentioned Jews. There was nothing anti-Semitic. It was not hate speech. It was pro-Jewish. I don't understand, but somebody had an agenda. Somebody had a vendetta against me because I humiliated them. Because well, they walked right into it, and anyway, they deserved it, and they went into the back. I know who it was. I'm pretty sure they're doing Aerodome here, but man, we really, I really need them bread and circuses. We got to keep that going. It affects loyalty. It's helping to make our cities revolt. Plus, they see all the amenities we have. Yeah, it's crazy. There's a lot that goes into this. Boy, I'll tell you. First, we neutralize the governor. No, we're going to have this one. Now, what are your promotions? And the other one will be neutralize government. Alright? Now, there. Now I may, I don't know, if she uses nuclear weapons against me, I'll nuke her, but she don't really have much left. I already took, let's see, Susa, Sparta, and Ray so far. That's 3 cities. And approaching fast. Okay. Save. Yep, there goes the alarm. All right. So here in this picture here, this, you can see the 6 original cities that I built, that I had from like very early in the game. Well, not very early. It took a while before I built any of those cities, besides the first one. That was how it all began, and now if you include all my city-state allies, I cover 60% to 2/3 of the map here. So yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, goodbye, people of Germany. Duty calls.